His name is Vicar van Baskerville. I wonder how he came to live like this. Well, listen up. According to a man who was devoted to his family and father, he was falsely convicted of working with a demonic clan and sentenced to the guillotine. It was not the worst punishment, but it was not deserved. Just before the end, he decided that if he had a second chance at life, he would never turn back into a hound, having already caught his prey. To close his eyes, waiting for his sentence, he heard only a loud thud, but he felt absolutely no change in his body. When he opened his eyes, he saw a baby's cradle. The room he was in was cold and gloomy, with the sound of children's cries everywhere. He tried to get out of bed, but his body wouldn't listen to him. Then he realized that he was in the body of a baby. This being the estate of the Baskerville family, it was the largest and most beautiful place in the whole town. These babies were gathered here for a reason. It's a ritual for selection into the hounds. It was that horrible ritual created by the head of the family, the patriarch, under the name of Hugo de Baskerville. He was known to the world as a cruel and loveless man. After examining all the children, he says, "There's no special kids here. It's just garbage this time. Get them out of here." But at the very door there was a lullaby in which Vikir van lay. Unlike the other children, he lay still and looked at everything with intelligent eyes. That made Hugo very interested. But nevertheless, the patriarch ordered to move all the children to the Cradle of Swords, which was tantamount to death. Vikir was in a child's body, but he remembered everything. He remembered at once that it was Hugo who had accused him. However, Vikir couldn't help but notice that Hugo now looked much younger, so there was no doubt that he has traveled back in time to his own infancy. He spent his past life as a hound, illegitimate. He received an extremely poor education in horrible conditions. A hound dog must be true to his mission. Eliminations, ambushes, threats, and so on. It's the hounds that do all the dirty work. He did everything he could to make the Baskerville family the best of the 7 families. The reason for his loyalty is very simple. He wanted the family or Hugo to recognize him as his equal. 10 years after the opening of the gates to the demonic kingdom, the war against the demons ended with the victory of the humans. And the reward for a loyal dog who served his family all his life was death. He was executed for one simple reason, because the hound knew too much. And now that he had a second chance, he was determined never to make that mistake again. He wanted to take revenge immediately, but in the body of an infant it was impossible to do. Though with his mind he was an adult, but the body of a child. Moving to the Cradle of Swords is a great opportunity to become stronger. We need to get stronger from now on. Children born in the Baskerville area have to be trained. They're just thrown into a maze of swords and traps. And then they have to get to the River Styx to prove their talent. River Styx, a legendary place that makes children's bodies like hardened steel. However, everything has its price. To get to the river first, you have to get through the Wall of Swords directly, and none of the kids have ever been able to do that. Last time he was outmaneuvered by his siblings and had no effect. But this time he has a trump card up his sleeve. After getting through the Wall of Swords and shredding all his hands to the point of blood, he was able to get to the river first and receive the blessing of the River Styx. He's the only one who could get to the river that fast. The water penetrates deep into his body and bones through deep cuts. Who would have thought that such a good ending would change everything so drastically? Gradually, the air starts to run out. The pain in your chest does not allow you to move normally. You have to hold on as long as possible. No matter how painful it is, you have to be patient. The baby didn't surface for a long time. The subordinates started panicking and screaming, "Get him out! We've got to get him out! Otherwise he'll die." Hugo, however, was thrilled that a baby could do this. The patriarch asks John Barrymore how long the baby has been underwater. Vikir had been underwater for 7 minutes. Not every adult can do that, and not every child even more so. Hugo, though amazed that the baby could stay underwater for so long, was still worried about him. He came to the shore and he said, "Son, you can come out. You've already shown you've learned your worth." But when Vikir heard Hugo's voice, he thought, "Yeah, you old idiot, you're not going to make me float that easily. You need to soak up as much water as you can." Naturally, this plan was a failure, and the Vikir lost all his air supply. He started waving his arms in panic, his lungs filled with ice water. Just as suddenly, Hugo pulls him right out by his leg. Smiling, he says, "Look at that kid. It wasn't enough for him to dip in the river, but he drank its water, and he already has teeth. What's his name?" And the butlers, after a little thought, replies, "Sir, it's Vicar van Baskerville." Now the Vikir needs to seize the time and quietly bare his fangs, and when the time comes, he will rip the head off his goat. It is resolved. The Baskervilles must disappear from the face of the earth at the hands of Vikir van Baskervilles. At the age of 8, he was already so talented that he could have been called a genius, but that wasn't unusual in his family. At the age of 12, he began taking on missions of assassination, espionage, and conquest. When he turned 29, he felt he had reached his limit in swordsmanship compared to his pure-blood family members. At 30, the gate leading to the demonic realm opened, followed by an invasion of demonic clans. At 35, he experienced a true era of destruction and monster killing. When he was 39, the long war finally ended with the victory of the nation. At the age of 40, he was rewarded for his devotion. And the reward was false condemnation, humiliation, and then the guillotine. Waking up the day after the fatal ordeal, Vikir saw the children's room again, which this time was quiet. But if he is here, it means he has successfully completed the test and absorbed enough water from the river Styx. Now he's in a better position to start his life than he was last time. Suddenly, an unknown woman enters the room holding a jade box. The girl placed the box in the young lord's crib and left. Vikir looked at her in surprise at what the box had brought him. As soon as the girl left the room, this box opened by itself, and a thick black smoke-like fog billowed out of it. After the smoke disappeared, 2 blood mambas emerged from the chest. These snakes are incredibly rare and dangerous. 1 drop is enough to kill an entire village. Seeing these snakes, the Vikir was not frightened, but on the contrary, even angry. He wondered who this mysterious girl was who decided to get rid of her rival in such a sneaky way. What's more dangerous, these 2 mambas could kill all the children in this room. Vikir grabbed the snakes so that they couldn't move or bite. As the Vikir held those snakes by the throat, he was seized with a savage rage. It was at that moment that he made his final decision. He will destroy the whole family with his own hands. The next day, Baskerville's men were shocked to find a child sleeping peacefully with 2 dead vipers. All the nursemaids who were in the nursery that night were tortured and executed, but the cause of the vipers was never found out. Guards were also put in place to better protect the children, and only the little hound dog knew the truth. In order to carry out his plan, Vikir must become stronger. 8 years later, the Vikir, along with the rest of the children, were dedicating a special school for people like them. Their classes started before sunrise. One of the subjects they made up was fencing. In one of their first lessons, their teacher told them about the levels of fencing. If a warrior cannot infuse his sword with mana, he is at the beginner swordsman level, and when he can infuse his blade with enough mana, he has already moved on to expert swordsman. When the sword exudes mana in the form of a liquid aura, the level is called sword graduate. Finally, when the aura is permanent and its shape can be controlled and changed, the level is called sword master. The teacher also added that the strongest of the Baskervilles, Sir Hugo, was at this level. The children knew that the head of their house was incredibly strong, but the fact that he possessed supreme prowess, they didn't suspect. Vikir, when he heard that, he was upset. That already in this period of time, Hugo possessed a master swordsman. He needs to become even stronger than he was in his previous life before the ceremony. The teacher, noticing that the Vikir is not listening to him, says, "Young Mr. Wicker flying in the clouds again." Well, Vikir, as if he didn't hear him, he was completely immersed in his thoughts. Watching him, the teacher thought, he got a strong physiology from being in the river Styx for 7 minutes. All he has to do is explain one thing and he'll learn 100 more on his own. He's much more talented than the rest of us. The patriarch must be very pleased with his progress. Meanwhile, the Vikir pondered how many years it would take him to deal with Hugo. The other kids disliked him very much because of his talent. They thought he was trash and a loser. They didn't know that he could easily take their heads off with a wave of his hand, but they teased him all the time. After class, 3 of his brothers decide to ambush him, cornering him instead of yelling at him. "There are a lot of rumors about you. A lot of rumors. Somehow you stayed in the river Styx for a full 7 minutes and managed to kill 2 vipers while still walking under the table." However, they were also well known last year. After all, they were the ones who captured him when he escaped after his conviction. They were called the Hugo de Baskerville triplets. They may act like idiots, but they're a lot stronger than they look. The one on the left is called Highborough, the one in the middle was Mildborough, and the one on the right was Lowborough. After a decade, they've become a real problem, so now is the perfect time to show them their place. As all of a sudden, Highborough pulls out a dagger and points it at Vikir's neck. With frantic eyes, Highborough asks, "They say if you wade in the river Styx too long, your body becomes like steel, which means the blade won't hurt you, so if I turn you, you won't die, right?" When all of a sudden, Highborough comes at Vikir from behind and puts his hand over his nose so he can't breathe. And with a smile on his face, he says, 7 minutes in the river Styx? I'll take my arm off if he can survive 3 minutes. The Vikir didn't fight back. He decided to play along with them a little. A minute later, Highborough and Milborough, they say, "Such stories can't possibly be true." In about 10 more seconds, he'll give up. However, more than 3 minutes had passed. To say that the brothers were surprised is not to say anything. They were just shocked at how such a thing was possible. It had been over 10 minutes, The Vakir was still standing. It seemed like he could stand like that all day. Having quenched their interest, Highborough and Milborough shouted, "All right, Lowborough, let him go. We don't want any trouble if anything happens to him." When Lowborough removed his hand, he felt a savage pain in his arm. Looking at it, he saw that his whole arm was covered with blood. In pain, the guy screamed all over the basement. Just then, the Vakir spit out a piece of his arm. The brothers scream, "What are you doing, Vakir?" Wiping his mouth from the blood, the Vakir says with frantic eyes, "No, or saying eat your hand if I last more than 3 minutes." Highborough, not thinking long, tells him, "You idiot, I'm not afraid of you. Get ready to go to the afterlife." But he is stopped by a shout of brother. The brothers about to go to the priest to have the finger put back in its place, when suddenly Vakir tells them, "Who let you guys go?" Highborough could not tolerate such insolence, and attacked the Vicar with a dagger, hoping to punish him for what he had done. He plunged his dagger with all his might into the Vakir's belly. He shouted, "Have you forgotten that we are a year older than you?" But when Highborough opened his eyes, he was horrified. His dagger could only slice his clothes, nothing more. Vakir grabbed his brother's arm and whipped out the dagger. When the shouting of the Highboroughs subsided, Vakir told, "You seem to forget that we're Baskervilles, which means talent and strength trumps age." A few seconds later, Vakir's face changed dramatically. His gaze resembled that of a rabid animal. When Highborough saw the Vakir's distraught look, he screamed, "Oh my God, the rumors were true." The Vakir didn't take long to punch his brother right in the nose. The speed of his blow was amazing, and Highborough didn't even notice it. Lowborough decided to stand up for his brother, so he fought the Vakir with his fists, which was obviously a bad idea. But for a Vakir, such attacks are just child's play. Lowborough, unable to even get close to him, caught the kick. As all 3 brothers lay crippled on the floor, the Vakir said to them, "Don't be so afraid. You'll get better very soon. But I will not allow you to leave this room, because this way you will have to live with the discomfort of natural bodies." Raising the dagger he had knocked out of Highborough's hands, he said to his brothers, "But I'm being kind today, so I'm going to let one of you go." Middleborough asks with a look of horror on his face, "Well, which one of us can leave?" Without a moment's hesitation, the Vakir throws them a dagger and says, "And that's for you guys to decide. But I won't wait long, so don't take too long." With these words, the Vakir scared the brothers more than a little. The Vakir's gaze became insane again. Through a wild smile, he says, "Isn't it worth surviving? Just one?" The brothers began to look at each other suspiciously. Each of them wanted to survive. Vakir managed to wreak havoc between them. When the Vakir heard the brothers begin to fight amongst themselves, he thought with a smile on his face, "The Baskerville triplets are starting to fall apart." On the evening of the same day, Barrymore came to report to the head of the family. "There has been another bloody incident in the ruby mines with the Morg family. They claim the ruby mines as their territory." Listen to the butler. Hugo says, "There will soon be an opportunity to discuss the case. The Morg family will try to track us down first. Is there any more news?" Sighing, the butler says, "Based on the midterm grades at Fortress Juvenile, young Mr. Vakir got the highest score on his written exam." Hugo was incredibly happy to hear this, for he had great hopes for him. Hugo asked, "When will there be practically an exam for children in Fortress Juvenile?" After checking the exam schedule, the butler replies, "In 5 days, my lord, the knights cleared the room in advance during the preparations. That means the fortress is pretty empty right now." As suddenly Barrymore began to get very agitated, and in a trembling voice says, "I also have to tell you about a situation in the fortress. There was a serious fight between your gentlemen recently." Hugo asked him in an angry voice, "Serious drama? How many died?" But fortunately there were no fatalities. But Highborough had all his teeth knocked out or badly damaged. Middleborough had his jaw knocked out, and Lowborough was missing his left index finger. Of course, they regained their health after treatment, but the psychological damage was quite significant. "Hear this," Hugo says. "They're very close, so they didn't become friends with each other. So take the conflict with the other gentleman." Suddenly, the butler speaks. It was Mr. Vakir, the one who wrote the written exam the best. Hugo was incredibly surprised by this. Hugo personally wanted to talk to the boy, so he invited him to his office. Vakir understood perfectly well why he had been called to Hugo's office. As soon as the Vakir entered the room, he immediately greeted the patriarch. Hugo says with a smile on his face, "Patriarch. Yeah, I think that's right. You've grown a lot since we last met, Vakir. I heard you got in a fight with the triplets over senior class." Vakir, pretending to be stupid and harmless, says, "Oh, if you brothers. I think they've gotten good treatment." Hugo's voice changes abruptly to harsh. Leaning over to the guy, he says, "I'm not talking about physical wounds. I'm referring to the damage you've done to their hearts." From that day on, they think separately and don't even talk to each other anymore. Their combined technique was impressive, but now their relationship is completely ruined. You don't think you did the wrong thing? Vicar, without any regret in the voice, says, Wrong? What did I do? You've completely broken up your brothers, replied Hugo. As suddenly, the Vikir's gaze became frantic and cold again. With complete self-confidence, he said, But I'm stronger. How can a stronger person be wrong? After a few moments of silence, Hugo tells him, Look, Vikir, your brothers came here before you and said they would generously forgive you. And you still don't feel even a little guilty. Laughing, the Vikir says, They forgave me? Why would they forgive me? They're the ones who started it. As the Vikir was suddenly flooded with memories from his past life. The youngest daughter of a family that the Baskervilles had just destroyed came to visit Hugo. She had become a nun over the years, told Hugo she forgave him, and offered her savings. And the Hugo's response to that suggestion was, I'm convinced that forgiveness is just an excuse for the weak who can't retaliate, because of their perceived lack of strength. When suddenly his memories are interrupted by Hugo, who says that he understands perfectly well the family motto, Only the strong will rise to the top. Weakness is a sin. Suddenly, Hugo extends his hand towards Vikir and shouts, Barrymore, let him take anything from the food storage. Vikir was immensely pleased and grateful to the patriarch for such a gift. With childish naivety, he shouted out, I can take the chocolate. Just before they leave, Hugo stops them and says, My son, do your best in the intermediate stages. I have great hopes for you. The Vikir, wordlessly mad again, his eyes glowing bright red, he promised he would do his best. Is a glorified chocolate enjoyed even by the gourmet Morg family. It's of the highest quality, which confectioners work incredibly hard to achieve. But Vikir wants raw chocolate, but more specifically cocoa beans, the ones that smell strong. The butler did not expect such a request. He was speechless for a second, but he immediately ordered them to be brought. Vikir, without thinking for a long time, started eating one bean after another. It was hard for him to stop. The thing about these bloody beans is that they show off their vivid odor. One such bean can be used to make 100 bars of milk chocolate. After eating a dozen gods, the Vikir grimaced, for in their raw form they are incredibly bitter. This behavior of the young gentleman was of great interest to the butler. Vikir initially didn't want to eat the chocolate. The bloody beans would come in handy for his practical exam in 5 days. On this day, there will be a terrible catastrophe unlike anything the Baskerville family has ever seen. In this world, the Baskerville family is sometimes spoken of as a family of berserkers. The children of this family are carefully trained from a very young age. As soon as taking steps to increase their own endurance, they need to run to the top of a steep mountain. In addition, time limits are observed, and you can't lie on your stomach and use. And when bedtime comes, in order to accustom them to the harsh world around them, the children are forced to lie down next to the monster's corpse. This period ends when they turn 8 years old, at which point young hound dogs begin to go through a deadly evaluation. Which is why the Baskerville family became famous under that name. The day has come. The day of the practical exam, the day of survival. And those who can pass this test can truly be called hound dogs. And today, in the mountains on the outskirts of the territory, a family full of monsters, the young gentlemen are traveling to the exam. An instructor meets them at the place and tells them the rules of the exam. Today's exam instructor will be Pavlov and Baskerville. Such heartless and cold-blooded people like him are unimaginable. The rules of the practical exam are very simple. The participants need to survive in this forest for a month. During this time, they have to hunt strong and large monsters, but the main goal is still survival. They will be awarded 10 points for successful survival, and 30 points if they manage to survive without being seriously injured. If they make the other contestants fail the exam, they will receive 50 points. If they manage to survive and defeat the monster, 70 points. And if they fulfill all of the above conditions, they can earn 90 points. In addition, if they can steal the badge that is given to each test taker, they will get some more points for this. If they die, 0 points. There are no starting points. Also, to successfully complete this exam, they will be helped by Mr. Hugo's lesson, which was that a swordsman dies when he becomes selfish. It is also recommended not to leave the restricted area. The mountains beyond its boundaries are forbidden places where there are many unknown things, so it is better to just move around inside the restricted area, where the curators control the monsters. Also during the exam, shadow dogs, guard soldiers will hide and assess your abilities. Rumors of the Vikir spread throughout the kingdom, so when the other children saw him, they began whispering and plotting against him. For some of the participants in this exam, the main goal was not to survive, but to make the Vikir die. When Vikir heard about the unknown mountain peaks, memories came flooding back at him, for it was there that he had fought the demons that had come out of the portal daughter. The Baskerville triplets were also present for this examination. Knowing what the Vikir was capable of, they did not even think of interfering with him. The exam will begin at the ringing of the bell. I wish good luck to all participants, but only the strongest will take this exam. As soon as Pavlov gave the signal, all the participants scattered in different directions deep into the forest. Now it was up to them. Some participants had taken this exam more than once, so they knew some good positions, from which they could easily hunt. Even though the triplets were all together, there was a lot of strife between them. Each thought they were smarter than the other. But in this place, one must act together, no matter what it takes. After Pavlov had signaled the beginning of the examination, he smoked and thought, this exam is not about killing others. Even though it's not forbidden, it's still complicated. Points are taken away for killing another contestant, so everyone tries their best not to accidentally hit anyone. After all, shadow dogs will always be around to minimize the number of deaths. However, the Vikiru did not care about the direction. He wanted to get to the forbidden area as quickly as possible, because only there he would truly be able to increase his strength in a battle with a real monster. The shadow dog, who was assigned to the Vikir, watched him curiously. He had heard many rumors about him, like everyone else, and he was eager to see his abilities in action. While searching the forbidden area of the Vikir, he came across a huge and old tree. The soil near this tree was different from other places. This kind of soil is perfect for staying alive. Vikir decided to make his camp in this spot and get some rest, while the others fought each other, teaming up to defeat the monsters. Vikir was just setting up camp. The Vikir made a fire and cooked dinner. The guard assigned to him thought he would hide here all the time and that all the rumors about him were lies. And since that's the case, there's no duty to follow him. After waiting a couple more minutes, he just took off, leaving the Vikir alone. When Vikir felt the hunter leave, he finally relaxed. The open-air bonfire reminded him of his last day, and back in a past life, one of his disciples told him the secret that cocoa beans reduce fishy odor and bloody cocoa beans take it away completely. A few days later, Vikir still made it to the Forbidden Zone. The Forbidden Zone, it's not called that for nothing. It is in this place that the creepiest and strongest monsters dwell. When Wicker was a scout, he and his troop often visited this place. Now, however, things are a little different here. But that's not surprising. As suddenly, walking through the Forbidden in the area, the Vikir smelled a strong odor of burnt wood. Walking deep into the woods some more, the Vikir discovers a burning stool. It could only be the occupation of one of the local monsters. He used to read them as annoying, but now he was even a little happy to see them. It was a hellhound. Originating from hell, they bring already devastating disasters to all they encounter, and once bitten, it is impossible to survive. The hot flames emanating from its mouth and eyes are incredibly explosive. Flammable objects cannot be extinguished until only ashes remain. A vigilant monster that has consumed all the flames of the underworld. Hellhounds. You have to be very careful with them. In his previous life, he barely managed to overcome one when he was 18. Of course, it would be literally impossible for an 8-year-old to do it now, and alone. However, he knows a way that even a child can defeat the hellhound. The Vikir didn't hesitate to pounce right on this monster, for he knew what the monster's greatest weakness was. They can only move in a straight line. It's hard for them to change direction abruptly. And the second weakness of the hellhounds, of course, was water. No matter how deep or narrow the waterline was, for them this obstacle was out of their reach. This slows them down considerably, and she begins to move, indulging in a weakness common to all dog monsters, opening her mouth while running. Also, chocolate is poisonous to dogs. Thanks to the dog running with its mouth open, Vicar managed to throw one cocoa bob in there. And when it comes to the business of bloody beans, one of which can make 100 bars of chocolate, it's obvious he's going to make Monster Dog. Even the hounds from hell can't do anything to chocolate. This proves that, in the present times, strength is not the main thing, but intelligence and knowledge are the main thing. It'll probably hit the stomach and heart first, but the strong ribs protect them well. We need to target a weak point where there are no ribs. Killing monsters builds up energy in the body called karma, and it strengthens the body. His sword was now lighter than it was before. At this rate, he would be able to catch up his level from his previous life much faster. I wonder what kind of face Hugo will have when an 8-year-old boy brings in a monster with a B+ risk rating. With the trophy of a hound dog, he's already taken first place in the practical exam. He had also decided on the award he was going to ask for, of immense value that he could never have dreamed of obtaining in his last life. He will take this object, the value of which no one in the world knows, for himself. When suddenly, at the barking of the dead dog, 4 more hellhounds came running. They were incredibly angry, one might say rabid. They were filled with hatred for the Vikir for killing their kin. To be perfectly honest, he wasn't going to stop at one hound. Plus, he still had a lot of cocoa beans left. as suddenly the hellhounds and the hounds whimpered like little puppies. They had clearly been scared incredibly badly by something. Did they really doubt the bloodlust of a mere 8-year-old? Hellhounds would never accept their weakness even on pain of death. It wasn't the vicar that scared them. Suddenly the boy felt true evil behind him. Oh shit, it's Cerberus. It won't be easy to defeat him, or rather unrealistic. Cerberus has an A+ rating. They're found on the 7th peak. I don't know why they'd be on the 1st. There's no way an 8-year-old could take him, no matter how strong he is. But when the vicar got a better look at him, he realized he was badly wounded. But who could hurt a Cerberus so badly? The vicar noticed that there were many arrows sticking out of his body. But who had the courage and strength to attack Cerberus? That's right. The barbarian tribe's territory is just over the mountains. If he only came here because of his pursuers, since Cerberus is badly injured. Vicar thought it was the perfect chance to get his head. After all, he would get an incredible amount of karma for the head of a monster of that rank. At Baskerville Manor, the vicar was hiding his power, including this fact that he had reached the level of a sword expert, and that he had learned the 3rd Baskerville technique. He's already reached a level that other hounds don't reach until they're adults. He couldn't let this chance slip away. But even though Cerberus was badly wounded, he was still an incredible threat. The vicar's ball skills were staggering. He was 100% sure of himself that he could beat the wounded Cerberus. Before his return in time, the vicar had modified and refined his swordsmanship skills. During the war with the demonic clan, so much so that there was not a shadow of extra movement in his techniques. Besides, his body was now enhanced by the river sticks, and the weapons the vicar fought with worked beautifully against the wounded Cerberus. Not exactly. He thought it was working. However, his sword failed to penetrate the thick Cerberus skin and shattered into 1,000 small pieces. In an instant, the vicar relaxed. Cerberus used his claws. Luckily, thanks to the steel body that the river Styx had given him. The claws could not pierce his body, but the force of the blow was so strong that it threw the vicar off. In its flight path was a tree, upon impact. Vicar began coughing up blood. His internal organs nearly ruptured. When he opened his eyes, the vicar didn't realize what was happening. The only thing he realized was that he had lost consciousness. Well, a second later, he remembered that he had taken a direct hit from a Cerberus. He felt a sharp pain in the area of his left arm, and it was ripped off. When he looked at his hand, he saw deep cuts from the Cerberus claw. His hand was miraculously still in place, but he couldn't move it. He knew Cerberus was wounded, but to dwell only on such, ain't that the effect of the river Styx? It's incredible that his body was able to withstand a blow from a ferocious Cerberus. Glory to the river Styx, but Cerberus never stopped attacking him. But there was still enough strength to dodge. But the damage is still quite severe. He can't survive another attack like that. This is not an easy fight, but an experienced hunter is obliged to find a way out of the situation. The best solution at this point is to run away as fast as possible. If Cerberus hadn't been wounded, the vicar would have been torn to pieces by now. The local barbarians are to be thanked. If he gets behind the iron fence, he'll get out of the restricted area. All you have to do is prepare for the prepared spot, and he wins. And if the Cerberus manages to catch him before then, he's dead. The vicar ran headlong in search of his camp. The vicar ran headlong for his camp, for once he reached it, he would be safe. Cerberus was clacking his jaws just centimeters from the vicar's head, but he needed to hold on just a little longer. Just a little longer. When suddenly the vicar stumbles over a root sticking out of the ground. Could be his fatal mistake. Vicar could literally see what Cerberus was eating for breakfast. The stench from his mouth made his eyes water. At last, Vicar has landed in a safe zone. Now he can be calm. Welcome to the Cradle of Swords, Cerberus. In his pursuit of the Vicar, this sinister monster didn't realize he had stumbled upon the giant swords. It would be the last mistake of his life. Who would have thought he would use a trap set on hellhounds to eventually catch a Cerberus? That's just genius. Cerberus belongs to the same kind of monster hounds as the hellhound. The essence of the blood gods that he impregnated the wooden spears with will be poisonous to him. Since Cerberus is a high-ranking demon, he can't be killed so easily. These traps can only stop him for a while. Vicar decided to put the karma he had collected to work, and finally put an end to this dog. However, this attack also did absolutely no damage to the Cerberus. It only made the demon dog angrier. Even though there was only one head left, it didn't mean he was weaker. Cerberus still managed to escape from the trap, but the Vicar didn't even think about running away. He just started counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cerberus was closer and closer to breaking the Vicar apart with each step. The guy, however, didn't even think he was learning. He just stood there and kept counting. 6, 7. And then the Cerberus' eyes went blank. Legend has it that the Cerberus who was left with one head could take exactly 7 steps. Fortunately, the legends were true. The spear he hurled at the Cerberus is different from the others. It had a poisonous blood mamba fang attached to it, which would prevent it from traveling more than 7 paces at the slightest contact. Good thing he'd stashed it back then. Vikir starting to feel the energy of the Cerberus. Finally, that 3-headed man is dead. Well, that solves the new problem of how he's going to carry that carcass back. Cause of death would be pretty obvious. So maybe that shadow dog will witness it? I mean, he saw the Vikir punching the replica and digging the trap hole. However, the Vikir is up to something incredibly dangerous. Cerberus guards guarding their territory. He was probably protecting the dungeons somewhere nearby. Dungeons are mystical places where treasure is stored. Some powerful monsters use them as a lair. If the guard is missing, the dungeon should be empty. By spreading the scent of Cerberus, the Vikir will be able to avoid fights with small monsters. Dried earth, rotted leaves, wet roots, drooling footprints. One must follow these tracks. Following the Cerberus's trail through the dense thickets, Vikir found his lair. Once inside, the Vikir begins to remember that he has already been in this place in his past life. And this lair will be discovered 10 years later, but it will be empty. But that is surely not the case now. For he can sense Manu from beneath the rotten surface. I'm sure it hasn't been cleaned out yet. It was too dark inside this lair, and it seemed much deeper than the Vikir had realized. The Vikir is certain of the unspeakable riches he will find there. Onward into the heart of darkness. The deeper he got inside, the more amazing the place turned out to be. There are veins of ruby mineral running through the entire area. It's probably something to do with the Red Mountain. When suddenly, in the middle of the darkness, a bright red light appears. Could this be the entrance to the dungeon? The light was so bright it was impossible to look at. When Vikir ran to the source of light, he discovered a red ruby that radiated incredible power. It's pretty bright inside. Apparently the light is emitting mana from ruby. As much as the Vikir tried to hold back his curiosity, however, he failed. Walking over to Ruby, Vikir began to examine him, when suddenly he saw the skeleton of a man with a mysterious letter lying next to him. I wonder what happened to that poor guy. Examining the skeleton more closely, Vikir saw that the wounds that were inflicted on this man were puncture wounds, which means that I killed him, not a monster. But he was more interested in the letter that lay next to the bones. The letter said, "My name doesn't matter. I'll just call myself Cain. I don't want to pollute the blank sheet of paper with my real name." It was hard not to notice that this letter was written by a man from the Baskerville family. All the members of the family had a distinctive handwriting. So let's get on with it. I wrote this so that future generations won't make the same mistake I did. This stone was talked about in the family as a legend. My brother Abel and I stumbled upon this place by accident and cleared the dungeon of all monsters. We killed every monster in our path and arrived at the altar. To realize the ultimate purpose of this place, it bound our feet for a very long time. 3 whole years. Without reading the letter to the end, Vikir says, "Wow, 3 whole years. They wanted the treasure that badly? The final destination must be in here somewhere." At first, the whole body is in this crystal. Suddenly, the Vikir discovers some writing on the altar, or rather a riddle. Goes in alone, but when one is inside, there are 2. Leaves alone 2. Trying to make sense of this mystery, Vikir decided to read the letter to the end. My brother and I have thought about this text countless times, and we finally came to a decision. My twin brother and I were one in the womb, but when we were born, we were split in 2. In other words, in order to retrieve the treasure of this dungeon, we had to become one again. Which means only one of us could lose the family treasure. After a fierce battle, I killed my own brother, so there was only one left at the stone altar. So why can't I take the treasure? Because I killed my brother. Think about it. Killed him. Without even knowing why. After moments of regret, I decided to leave this place. I want to tell all the brave people who find it to leave immediately. In the devil's den of temptation, you have nothing to look for. It's either misery or death. So they came here after so many trials, but they left with nothing. But there's a little problem. The Vikir don't have twins. Even though he doesn't have Gemini, the text hasn't changed, which means Cain and Abel misunderstood him. Goes in alone, but when one is inside, there are 2. Leaves alone 2. What could that mean? You have to use your brain and think hard. There are no dungeons that are impassable. When suddenly the Vikir shouted to the entire dungeon, "Shit, it's so simple. It's so simple that it's unbelievably complicated." Cain and Abel were just unlucky. They couldn't solve the problem precisely because there were 2 of them. They were just fooled. A dark path and a contrastingly bright stone. The answer to the riddle is hidden in the dungeon itself. When the Vikir entered the dungeon through the dark passage, he was alone. But as soon as Ruby's light hits him and a shadow appears, he's 2. As soon as the Vikir was able to solve this riddle, the ruby exploded and shattered into 1,000 small shards. The Vikir shouted proudly to the entire dungeon, "The answer to your riddle is a shadow." As soon as he said the word, The ruby shards began spewing black smoke, and with it, opening the gateway to the treasure. This can't be! This is the relic of the Devil's Lair, a blade whose name has become legendary throughout the history of mankind. This is the blade of Beelzebub. As soon as the blade appeared to the Vakir, a new message appeared on the altar stating that only the possessor of pure Baskerville blood can curb the full power of Beelzebub. Upon seeing this blade, the Vakir became very nervous. He shouted in surprise. So he was here originally? Vakir remembered as a child of a past life once saw a picture in a book of a gluttonous fly, Beelzebub, an unknown great monster that invaded the continent in ancient legends, one of the holy constellations of the devil, also known as the Seven Deadly Sins. To stop the 7 deadly sins, the heads of the 7 families came out, and they took one holy constellation for each one, and the constellation with which the head of the first Baskerville fought. It's gluttony, Beelzebub! The remains of Beelzebub's body were kept in the lands of Baskerville, his demonic energy, according to people, infused into the monsters. But that's just an old legend no one believes anymore. However, this legend was true, and this blade was later taken by a demonic clan. This resulted in countless deaths among the humans on the battlefield. But this time it won't happen, because this blade now belongs to the Vakir. I think the Vakir has had enough. It's time to go back, before the other monsters want to take over this cave. Vakir suddenly feels very sick. Just a little bit more and he loses consciousness. He can't understand what's happening to him, as he is suddenly overcome by a sudden feeling of hunger. It wasn't Wicker who was hungry, it was Beelzebub, a terrible hunger gripping his insides. I wonder if that's why he's so charming. He can smell something tasty 10 kilometers away. Beelzebub was incredibly hungry. He could smell food hundreds of miles away. It's no wonder, because he'd been locked up for centuries. The demonic blade brought him right to the corpse of the hellhound the Vakir had defeated earlier. Beelzebub drinks her blood, and the Vakir's insides are finally back to normal. I hope all life on the mountain peaks didn't die out because of Beelzebub's terrible hunger. How long will he have to feed it before it can live properly? Beelzebub, fly gluttony, first slot, Hellhound Hospital second and third slot, empty. I wonder what that was just now. Could it be Beelzebub's ability? Beelzebub, the fly of gluttony. They say he can drink his opponent's abilities. Countless people have lost their abilities and become trash due to the fact that it can consume almost endlessly. But because of the danger, the list was limited to only possibly absorbing 3 abilities. Hellhound bleeding, a skill that literally drains all of an enemy's blood, even through the smallest of wounds. Vakir realizes that an incredible number of new opportunities have opened up before him, and now it will be much easier to carry out his revenge plan. Beelzebub had almost completely sucked out the blood of the Hellhound, but the Vakir couldn't allow it to completely consume the corpse. After all, if the body was in bad shape, he wouldn't be able to explain it. After the demon took a bite, all 3 slots were occupied. First slot, the burning wound of Cerberus. Second slot, Hellhound Hospitals. Third slot, wild rat regeneration. Vakir was surprised by the 3rd slot. Where did he get his fast regeneration from? Beelzebub seems to have managed to eat the rat that Cerberus ran over as well. He was lucky enough to get a burn wound from a Cerberus. Since the burn pain is the strongest in the world, this skill will be even more beneficial than the Hellhound's bleeding. Well, now that the monster's preparation for the exam is over, Vakir decides to wait until the exam is over and not get into trouble. After the practical examination was completed, the young hounds returned to the Baskerville house. Most of them returned unharmed. Some, however, had received non-serious injuries. All were fairly evaluated for their accomplishments, and the young hounds were rewarded with a sword, shield, or necklace made from parts of the monsters they hunted during the exam. However, one monster, a part of which was brought at the end of the exam, shocked everyone present, and even such an experienced warrior as Pavlov. The killing of this monster was immediately reported to Mr. Hugo, and Barrymore said that it was a Vakir who accidentally walked into a restricted area during a practical exam and killed a Cerberus. It was also found that before Cerberus met Vakir, the Hellhound had been wounded by a tribe of barbarians, and the weapon that Vakir used to defeat Cerberus was poisoned, a powerful poison. Barrymore tried to find out more about what happened in the Forbidden Zone from the Vakir himself. However, the guy returned to his room under the pretext of severe fatigue. Hugo was incredibly excited by this news. After all, even seasoned warriors try to outmaneuver, and an 8-year-old boy was able to handle him. Barrymore was also shocked that Mr. Van and not D had such talent. The thing is, the prefix Van is used for children of non-high blood. However, Hugo was very different from the previous patriarchs. When he raises a hound, he doesn't separate them for blood purity. He believes that blood doesn't matter, whether it's from a royal family or a farming family. What matters is talent and intelligence. There are exceptions to all standards now, okay? Barrymore thought Hugo doubted his second son, who are preparing for isolation training. That evening, Hugo invited the Vikir into his office to learn more about how he had managed to deal with the Cerberus. The Vikir, without thinking, tells him that he covered his spear with chocolate, because if he tells the truth, he could be followed. Hearing this, Barrymore shouted out in admiration, "So that's why you asked for chocolate earlier." As Hugo suddenly asks Vikir why he didn't answer how he handled the Cerberus to the butler. Actually, the reason was very simple. Vikir knew the hierarchy of the house thoroughly, so he said that Barrymore was not his master, so he did not have to answer him on that question. The boy's answer pleased Hugo very much, but still he asked him who was your master. As a Vikir belonged to the family, the head of the clan, and was his lord. As a reward, the corpse of the Cerberus will belong to the Vikir, and he also has the right to use any wish that Hugo will fulfill personally. Without thinking, the Vikir wished to gain access to the library of 10,000 messages. He surprised them. A library of 10,000 epistles, one of the largest libraries in the Empire, which is located in the heart of the Baskervilles' domain. Only the patriarch, his right-hand man, and their direct heirs had access to this library. It's a wonder an 8-year-old boy even knows it exists. But the Vikir was serious. He told the patriarch that if he refused this request, he would have to break in. After a moment of awkward silence, Hugo says that the guy can visit this library whenever he wants. Hugo also advised him to read about the 6th Baskerville technique, which is located in the 6th restricted area deep inside the library. Vikir was surprised that this Hugo had allowed a secretly born child to read about her. In his previous life, Hugo had forbidden children of medium blood to study techniques beyond 4th blood. Currently, Hugo level 7 Baskerville's technique. Before the return of the Vikir, he was able to bear 9 fangs. But the Vikir still remembers a life of injustice, and this time, he must outdo the South, no matter what it takes. In the library, Vikir wanted to find more of the treasure of Baskervilles, a book about fencing with the teachings of the first patriarch, who was able to overcome the 7 deadly sins. This book is Hugo's ticket to the afterlife, which he wrote himself. He finally made it to the library of 10,000 messages. In his previous life, he could only dream of it. All the books on swordsmanship that he was so eager to get his hands on in his past life were now in the public domain right in front of him. No matter how much mana the Baskervilles' child had, he would never be able to learn sword arts better than the 4th technique. To make sure that future hounds do not become a threat to their master, Baskervilles adhere to this rule as a defense mechanism. Who would have thought that Hugo would offer a book on the 6th technique to a child not from the main branch of the family? But Hugo only made that exception because he thought an 8-year-old couldn't master it in a day. To make his comeback, Vikir had thoroughly learned the theory of the first 4 techniques, only to look at the theory of the 5th. Baskerville fencing. Depending on the level of the sword, it counts as 1 tooth for the first technique, 2 for the second, and so on. When new teeth appear, a special red sword energy also appears. However, Vikir didn't care about the 6th technique. After all, he came to this library for another reason. The level he desires is above all of this. This place is full of all sorts of books. Any hound of the Baskerville family dreams of reading at least 1 book in the deepest of libraries. But no one knows that among the many dusty books, there is a hidden treasure. Not even Hugo knows about this book. After hours of searching, Vikir finally found what he was looking for. This book, on the basics of the first technique that no Baskerville child reads. Plus, some pages are torn out, so it's considered completely useless. But the Vikir knows its true value. Before his return, the hound squad he was a member of found a strange relic in a dungeon on the border of the Forbidden Mountains. It was a page from a fencing book, 1 single page torn out, written in the handwriting of the Baskervilles. Hugo, thinking it important, searched the library for a book without such a page. And that book was the Ambush Fencing Book. Its author was the first patriarch of Baskerville, who described the 10th technique in detail. Hugo was literally insane at the idea of learning the 10th technique, so sent the hounds out to find the remaining 6 torn-out pages that described the technique, as it later turned out that each of those pages was held in the territory of the 7 great families, and so Hugo declared war on them, sending hounds to all those who disagreed. After the sacrifices of countless hound dogs, Hugo got his hands on all the missing pages, and the reward because of all this was contempt and death. How meaningless the past life had been. Because of this, Hugo surpassed the 7th technique and obtained the 9th technique, climbing to this level over the corpses and blood of his hounds. It was the Vikir who collected all those pages and memorized the contents of each one. But the reason he never surpassed the 4th technique was because he didn't have the original book. It turns out that when other people read this book, it does seem useless. But if you find all the missing pages and fill in the blanks, false and deceptive information turns into real art. The first step to the 10th technique is similar to the first technique. When you bare your sword, draw the first path, and show fury, and then the sword surpasses its limit. Before his return, he had reached the highest level of aura and flawlessly developed the fourth technique. But this time, he had to reach that level of strength before his 15th birthday. Vikir sat in this library all night. It only took him one night to fully memorize this book. With such a young body, he wouldn't be able to create 10 teeth. However, would he now be able to learn the fifth technique that he was never able to in his previous life? His past life was just miserable. After so much hard work, he was able to obtain the highest level of aura. But he was still unable to learn a suitable sword technique. Therefore, purebloods were his enemies. He couldn't surpass the fourth level for only one reason: because he was illegitimate. But this time he was determined to live a different life. And he would become the strongest in the Baskerville family. As if something hot rose from his heart to his neck. Vikir was so happy that he was able to obtain the fifth technique that he was ready to cry. This was the first step towards the fulfillment of his dream. As Vikir suddenly felt the force of a familiar blade. With record speed in the history of Baskervilles, the young hound's fangs bared against her master. He was finally able to create a fifth tooth. As long as his mana was enough to support it, he would be able to reach the level of his previous life. With the new tooth, his mana has also increased dramatically. It is now at a completely different level. In addition, his aura had become liquid, a sign of a sword graduate. He seemed to have changed from a high-grade sword expert to a low-grade sword graduate. Graduates are on a completely different level from sword experts. The form of the aura begins to turn liquid and viscous, and its strength also increases, allowing it to be used more easily. Obviously, his swordsmanship skills are already much higher than in his previous life. But Vikir is determined not to rest on his laurels and will achieve the 10th technique. The piercing fang he learned earlier, despite allowing him to become strong faster, also has its limitations. But on the other hand, ambush. It's a perfect sword technique that seamlessly transitions from attack to offense without much restriction. If he works hard enough, he can reach the mid-level graduate stage. Then he will have a 100% chance to kill, and a 50% chance if the encounter is face-to-face. But there's not a big problem. Hugo will obviously want to see what Vikir has learned during his time in the library. You can't go overboard or conversely show too little. He has to make Hugo look forward to something so that he has enough time to get everything he wants. After studying and learning the book thoroughly, Vikir decided to destroy it. Now Hugo and the rest of the hounds wouldn't reach the 10th technique. As the guards entered the library, they immediately smelled the horrible smell of burning. Realizing what was about to happen, Vikir started to justify that he had just left the glass in front of the window, and the book had caught fire. Guards, thoughts to reassure the young lord. And she said she wouldn't tell anyone. And if anyone found out, they'd take the blame. When suddenly the Vikir asks the guards, "Shouldn't you be busy dealing with the Morg family and the ruby mines?" But they assured the young lord that they had just returned from there. And if no one would know that they were not at the post, no one would ever know for the book. Vikir agreed to their proposal. It was very important to him, too. The hounds who were on guard at the time were surprised at how kind the young master was. They would have been executed for breaking their fast. Immediately after the library, the Vikir headed for Hugo's offices to report on his progress in training. Making a smart face, Vikir says, "Well, I felt something sharp and warm, but with this soft viscosity. I've never felt anything like that before." What he heard made Barrymore's jaw drop. Hugo knew exactly what it felt like. It was the kind of sensation he had experienced himself. The aura is a sign that you have officially entered the sword world. Even a genius has to train non-stop for 15 years to reach the level of a low-ranked sword expert. Hugo fell silent. He was well aware that he could not have reached that level in one day, especially at such a young age. Hugo wanted to see what Wicker was talking about, so he promptly ordered a fight to be organized for the young lord. Hugo's plan to test his abilities was simple enough, but insanely effective. A monster was brought into the arena for the young men to fight it. But this occasion was special, so Hugo prepared a particularly hungry and fierce monster. A huge C-class orc. Children his age are usually forbidden to fight such monsters. When the kids saw who Wicker was going to fight against, they couldn't believe it. The orc's chains were thrown off when the preparations were complete. The orc was not much of a threat to him. It was more of a challenge not to give away his true capabilities. With his first blow, Vikir strips the giant orc of his left arm. Yet he himself did not move an inch. It was clear to those around him that the Vikir was strong beyond his years. Being able to easily chop off the arm of an adult orc at such a young age. Now is the perfect time to attack the monster with all your might. After all, he is disoriented after losing his hands. Into the trail of the Vikir's arm, robbed him of his leg as well. He's probably just surprised to be wounded for the first time. And the characteristic skill of an orc, fast regeneration, is not activated. Monsters of his class can't stop a hellhound hospital. Vakir finally used the ability he got when he freed Beelzebub. Hugo was incredibly surprised at the 8-year-old's skill. He just watched the fight without saying a word. He was watching Vakir so closely because he couldn't figure out what he'd learned in the library. Suddenly, the Vakir, sensing the courage of the battle, forgets about his plan and uses the aura blade. It would be nothing, but with this attack he demonstrated his level of swordsmanship. Hugo's suspicions were completely confirmed. From this, and the technique, Hugo froze like a statue. Fixing her glasses, Barrymore says, "Sir, this is definitely the aura of a low-ranking sword expert. Congratulations. We've just witnessed the birth of a genius. I don't think there's such a thing in all 7 great families. From now on, the Vakir will be watched by all." Just as suddenly, Hugo noticed that something was wrong with the orc. After all, orcs are known for their regeneration, but apparently the blood doesn't stop. Hugo was incredibly happy with what he saw, though he would not admit it. He told Barrymore that the Vakir had only won because of the orc's weakness, though they knew full well that was not true. When all of a sudden the Wicker screams, "Wait, father! That's not all I'm capable of! If there's anyone here stronger than an orc!" The Vakir has chosen to show his strength only to a certain extent, to earn respect. If he's lucky, his progress will be recognized by everyone, and then he'll be separated from the Hugos. For example, he might be sent to the Farlands or accepted into the academy. Hugo could no longer contain the smile on his face, and then he spoke. "Vakir is right. You need to get more real-world experience at that age." During a long-distance mission, in the lands of the barbarians, they captured one uncharted creature for experimentation. Now this monster is pretty sensitive, as it hasn't eaten in a while, which means it's going to try its best to defeat Vakir. Previously, a Vakir never fought trolls. However, he had heard many stories from friends who had done so. Trolls, much stronger than orcs. But a Vakira is no scarecrow. The most dangerous thing about fighting a troll is getting hit by its devastating blow. Despite their enormous size, they are quite agile. The troll, however, still can't keep up with the Vakir's speed. He had a chance to attack, but he didn't, because he knew what the others didn't. Trolls have excellent regeneration power, so you should only attack with the strongest attacks. Therefore, a careful plan is required to hunt a troll. The rest of the Baskervilles' children watching the fight, they finally figured out the Vakir's plan. He had been dodging his attacks all this time, and since the troll hadn't eaten in over a month, he would tire quickly. He really is a genius. In fact, the Vakir could take down this troll in seconds with a single blow. But to make it more believable, he prolonged the fight as much as he could, playing his part. The perfect solution to deal with a troll without revealing your own abilities. Use his own power against him. Vakir managed to severely wound the monster's shoulder. But the troll will recover immediately, for its wound is not fatal. Killing a troll with the first Baskerville technique is too difficult, but it's also impressive that he reached that level in his 8 years. It is because of the fat troll skin that the first technique will not be enough to kill it. After a while, this roll will die from the Hellhound's bleeding skill, but it's pointless. When suddenly Hugo shouts for him to stop fighting, because further fighting could be life-threatening. But the Vakir is not in the habit of giving up halfway through. Such persistence and a thirst for victory surprised Hugo greatly. Vakir decided that if his next attack didn't take the troll's life, then he'd stop. How much strength is worth showing? But the guy had long ago decided on the answer to that question. He attributes his attack to the fact that he suddenly became stronger from an epiphany during the battle. However, it was a very risky move on his part. Interesting to see Hugo's reaction to this attack. The people in the arena are literally speechless. In the Baskerville family of iron-blooded swordsmen, a person's life is literally timed by the second. Around the age of 15, children can infuse the sword with mana. Hounds usually get their first Baskerville technique at this level. But now, for the first time in the history of the Baskervilles, and humanity in general, an 8-year-old boy has been given a second technique that normally only becomes available at the age of 18. Vakir understood perfectly well that he had done the impossible. So with a slight smile on his face, he said, "I made it through." Hugo's face literally froze in surprise. There was complete silence in the arena. But no wonder. A week later, in the common dining room, which is usually crowded and full of children, it was practically empty. After what happened, everyone's staying away from the Vakir. But I guess it's logical, considering that strength runs in this family, and no one wanted to get in trouble with him. Remember this guy, the Vakir could barely contain his laughter. It was funny to see Hugo's shocked face. Right now, he had only revealed that he had reached the second Baskerville technique and the level of a mid-ranked sword expert. However, the truth was that he was already a low-ranked sword graduate and could use the fifth Baskerville technique, but only once a week. Not to forget Beelzebub, who absorbed the troll's super-fast regeneration. Together with this ability, a Vikir should be much stronger than a normal sword graduate. With Beelzebub's appearance, the Vikir became much larger. Suddenly someone approached him from behind. "Oh, so it's our old acquaintance, the Baskervilles. Only what do these idiots want with a Vikir?" Sighing heavily, the Vikir says to his brothers, "You fools didn't have enough last time." They were horrified and began to recant, saying they had come for a different reason. And then Hybro speaks up. "We just wanted to say that you beat Cerberus and Troll pretty badass." Such a compliment even made the Vikir spit out his porridge. But Vikir knew this trinity very well from his past life, and it is not worth expecting anything good from them. He thinks they are plotting something against him. As suddenly the Vikir's reflexes gave an alarming sign. His entire body was covered in goosebumps, and a bad feeling appeared. His senses were not failing him. A second later, Barrymore was standing behind him. The butler came here on an errand from Hugo. Barrymore advised the young lord to come at once to the patriarch's rest. There will be talks today between the Baskervilles and the Morg family. There have been a lot of misunderstandings between them lately. The trusted patriarch of the Morg family, Adolphus Morg, he's a very unpleasant old man. Despite his harmless appearance, don't underestimate him. First, they decided to discuss how the practical exam went. There were a few injuries that year. The Morg kids are just over-dramatizing. But that's not surprising. They're a noble family. Adolf not denying it, just joking around. Yes, of course, because Morgs are noblemen. In fact, the friendship between their families goes back centuries. The thing is, the Morgs are a family of famous magicians, and the Baskervilles are iron-blooded swordsmen, and each of them considers themselves stronger than the other. A long time ago, one of the emperors said that magic and swords could be great allies. Because of this, Morgies and Baskervilles began to be held in local training sessions, in which only children of 8 and 15 years old participated, and this training was held annually. However, there was a problem. There was a ruby mine between the Baskervilles and the Morgans' territories, and the conflict over it became bloody, as a result of which the relationship between the two families deteriorated greatly. But they continued to train together under the emperor's orders. That is why his younger brother Adolf arrived instead of the patriarch. Rumors of the young genius spread throughout the kingdom. Adolf was incredibly curious to learn more about him. But Hugo pretended it's only natural that it was Baskerville who became the most brilliant child in history, because Adolphus couldn't afford for the Baskerville family to humiliate the Morgans. He brought with him the most talented student at their magician's academy. Her name was Kamu. Kamu, unlike the Vikir, was of royal blood. Her mother was Adolph's sister, which means she's getting the best education that only the Morg family can afford. In addition, the girl has a rather fiery temper. She thought the Baskerville family were thieves who robbed their ruby mines. Adolphus tried to keep the situation quiet, because he realized that he could not stand an equal fight against Hugo. But the girl don't be confused and says, "Uncle, but you said that stupid beard-face stole our checkers." Trying to smooth things over, Adolf says it's just an understanding and she's just a kid. "I don't want to deal with this nonsense," Hugo says. "I don't think I have any need to teach your children etiquette." But Kamu didn't stop. She demanded that the Baskervilles return her rubies, for they didn't even have enough to research. You can tell the girl's spoiled beyond belief. But sooner or later there comes an end. Just like Hugo's patience had come to an end. He restrained himself with the last of his strength not to tear these underachievers apart. Apparently Morgs don't raise their children at all, but their quarrel is interrupted by a Vikir entering the room. Adolphus immediately stared at the kid with the thought, could this boy be the genius of the Baskerville family? As Kamu teleported directly into the Vikira, her eyes filled with genuine anger and hatred for all members of the Baskerville family. Vikir was pleasantly surprised to see her here. Though they had not seen each other before in this life, she would one day become the iron-blooded empress of the Morg family. She was called a genius by the Morg family, who raised countless great mages. At the peak of her powers, she single-handedly killed all the monsters in the Forbidden Mountain peaks, and then burned them on their spears, creating the famous border of blood and ash. She's also very beautiful, and she could manipulate even the imperial family. That's why they called her the fire goddess of power. But that's what she'll be in the distant future. Now she's just a silly kid. All she has on her mind are experiments and ruby mines. She came all the way from far away to throw such a pointless tantrum? Does she really think her yelling is going to make a difference? Vikir, sick of listening to her tantrums. That's why he called her a mindless hysteric. This made the young princess even angrier. She was going to show him the true power of the Morg family. However, the Vikir didn't care about her threat. After all, he knew no matter how strong she was, he was still stronger. But instead it's pointless fights. She's prepared a whole presentation about the histories of the two houses. Now that really sounds like the actions of a real queen. As she begins her speech, the princess says, "You should know very well that rubies are best mined from a mine, which is on the border of the Baskervilles and the Morgs and is called the Secret Unity Zone, isn't it? The problem is that the entrance to the mine is on the mortuary grounds, but the mine itself is on the Baskervilles grounds. As you can see, it's located so that the Baskervilles can't take all the rubies for themselves. But you state that it violates the boundaries and interferes with the work of Shaktyorov. You also refuse to pay the land lease. The end." The thing is, rubies are usually used as magical ingredients, so Baskervilles don't really need them. After hearing her out, the Vikir tells her that there are no idiots among the Baskervilles who would let Morgs on their land for a penny. The positions of both families were extreme. The Morgs wanted to take all the mine crystals for their magical experiments. But the Baskervilles couldn't just let a hostile family enter their territory. Either way, it's a lose-lose situation for the Morgs, no matter how much they hide it. But Kamu insisted that the Ruby Caves belonged to her family. In order to change Baskerville's mind, she decided to conduct some sort of experiment. "If my hand is in your territory, whose hand is it?" Kamu asked the guy. And immediately Vikir grabbed her wrist and laughed out loud. "If your hand is on my property, it belongs to me." The girl has perfectly understood how the Baskerville family works, but she never gave up hope of changing their minds. When all of a sudden Wicker says to her, "Who says I own all of you? I only own the part of you that's on my property." The guy, grabbing his dagger, out of frantic eyes, tells her, "That's how the Baskervilles solve cases." This behavior of the young lord did not frighten everyone in the room. The girl is afraid that Vikir will take her hand, but Adolf, who is responsible for the young princess's safety, intervenes in their argument. He demanded to release the girl immediately and apologize to her. Of course, Vikir wasn't going to do anything horrible. Accordingly, at the first demand, he let Kamu go. Adolphus was furious at such a joke by young Baskerville. Hugo also thought that Vikir had overreacted and he should apologize to the princess. Vikir was truly sorry for bringing Kamu to tears. He justified his actions by saying that it was considered a funny joke in his family. It was time to resolve the issue that had brought the trusted patriarch of the Morg family here. Hugo had several ideas for resolving their conflict. They need to start by having two families train together. On the face of the young princess, tears began to break through, and she made a promise that she would never forgive this and avenge herself. Here began the joint training sessions, or as they were called, friendly duels between Baskervilles and Morgs. Is a great opportunity for 8 to 15-year-olds to get in and show what they can do. So far, the 8-year-olds have mostly been testing each other on theory and mana control. Kids as young as 15 are fighting each other to improve their skills. This year, however, someone else has gotten all the attention. The most anticipated duel between Kamu and Vikir. At the request of the Morg family, standardized rules had been established. The representatives of each family waited for their duel. All evening. Time had come after the bell had rung. The young princess warned the Vikir not to expect mercy from her. She wanted to take out the Vikir with the first attack. So they decided to use one of the strongest magic spells in their arsenal. Thanks to the four-spell technique, she became famous as the brilliant offspring of the Morg family. She didn't just create a spell that 15-year-olds struggled to master, but several more. That was to be expected from a genius. Adolf was incredibly happy about this because he thought Vikir had no chance of standing up to the princess. And now, it's attacking. If this attack reaches its target, the Vikir may not survive. However, do not underestimate the young lord of the Baskervilles. In addition to his incredible strength, he also possessed incredible speed, so he was able to easily dodge all of her attacks. Vikiru found this attack quite amusing. Trying to hurt her feelings, he advised her to concentrate on one but stronger spell. He realizes that he is inferior to the princess in magic, so he decides to enter a mid-east battle in which he will have an advantage. Hoping to repel his attack, the girl summoned a wall of sand, but it was no barrier for the Viker. Now Kamu learns the real power of the Baskervilles and the river Styx. Since it was a friendly and demonstrative duel, Vikir did not apply his swordsmanship, but simply hit the girl on the forehead. It was enough for her. Kamur was incredibly outraged and offended by such a disrespectful attack. In anger, the girl shouts to him, "Don't tell me you're giving in!" But the Vikir was only joking. He looked at the huge bruise on the girl's forehead and asked her, "Does your forehead hurt? I think we should end their fight before things get out of hand." But the princess never gave up trying to punish the Vikir for his insolence and disrespect. You have to hand it to her willpower. No wonder she'll be queen in the future. But there was no logic in her defensive spells, for he could simply bypass those walls. Still, he decided to play along. No matter how strong these walls were, Vikir easily broke through them with one hand. The princess clearly didn't expect him to be able to break through two sand walls at once. For Vikir, This battle was just a game. He did not fight her seriously. After breaking through her strongest defensive spell, he asked, "Whose hand broke through these walls?" "The answer is the stronger hand." He slapped her forehead once more. Tears came involuntarily to the girl's face. She didn't want to show him her weakness. Vikir was hoping the girl would calm down after that and just give up. Unfortunately, the Vikir couldn't just finish her off. And Princess Everything kept attacking him, but to no avail. If he tried hard enough, he could break her neck in a tenth of a second, but that would be a huge problem. I wonder how she could even be calmed down. And then Wicker comes up with a brilliant idea. In parallel with their battle, 2 other members of the family were competing. Both of them were not of high intelligence. One of them constantly used fire magic, while the other constantly reflected it. Vikir's plan was for the Kamu clanmate's fire attack to hit her directly. It's time to put the plan into action. Jumping back, Vikir tells her, "Hey, Kamu Morg, you better use a protection spell." Adolf was horrified by what he saw. He knew perfectly well that the young princess would not be able to use the protection spell in time. And that would be the end of it. When the flames died down, and the smoke covered the entire training camp, everyone watched and waited eagerly to see what happened to the young princess after the attack. Fortunately, she escaped the damage from the spell, but the flames burned all of her clothes. She was left with only scraps of cloth covering a small part of her body. Even though people don't support the smoke when it clears, she'll be a laughingstock. It will be the greatest disgrace to the royal family of the Morg. When suddenly, from behind the thick smoke, Baskerville's jacket falls on her. Kamu was incredibly surprised by this. When the smoke slowly cleared, she saw that a Vikir with a naked torso was standing in front of her. Seeing him, she asked, "Why are you doing this? Why are you protecting the enemy? You're standing there half-naked yourself." But Vikir simply remained silent and smiled. For all his life, he hadn't cared what anyone else thought of him. Vikir felt a slight burning sensation in his left arm. It was surprisingly a scratch appeared on his body that was reinforced by the river Styx. Apparently, there was some mana left on that idiot's ball. To help the princess came running, the warriors and the families of the Morg. They were very happy that nothing had happened to the princess, and she was unharmed. Of the Hound of the Baskervilles were confused, for there was no clear winner in this battle because the young lord was wounded, but the princess was on the floor. But they were more amazed at the Vikir's body. From just looking at his muscles, it was obvious how much he had trained his body. Fortunately, the fight was without consequences. Kamu, however, will remember this act for the rest of his life. Vikir turned out to be nothing like she thought he would be. In the evening after the fight, Hugo asked the Vikir how he liked the fight with the young lady and the Morg family. For Vikir, it was very interesting. He once again found out the meaning of this event. Plus, it was a great experience, because fighting a mage was very different from fighting a swordsman. But Hugo asked him why he didn't finish the fighter himself. The thing is, Wicker wasn't sure exactly how to deal with the lady. In addition, the Vikir learned another very important lesson for himself. Relaxation during combat will lead to injury. Hugo was incredibly kind to him, and worried about him as if he were his own son. This behavior was very surprising, because he knew him so differently in his previous life. He'd always been stern and cold, rumored to be that way after the loss of his first wife and eldest daughter. When suddenly, Hugo asks Vikir for advice. What are they going to do about the ruby mines? You don't want to start a war with the Morg family. Vikir, I suggest you give these mines to the family Morg. Hugo was greatly surprised by this answer, but he wanted to hear the young lord's thoughts. The main goal of the Baskerville family is to increase their territory. Red Mountain, where the ruby mines are located, is just north of the Forbidden Mountain peaks. The monsters and barbarians living there will be a big problem. If they can manipulate the Morg family well, we'll minimize casualties during the investigation in that region. This answer pleased Hugo incredibly. It was the thought of a true strategist. When the Morg family gets control of the ruby mines, they'll send a lot of people there. And all the Baskervilles will have to do is push the monsters and barbarians. After that, they will deal with all the problems at once. Rubies wash rivers of blood from their enemies. And when that happens, Morgan will have to think twice before entering their territory. The idea was almost exactly the same as Hugo's. But that's not surprising, because the boy took it as a basis and added the fact that it was necessary to put more monsters in there. Even so, it would be necessary to keep an eye on the Morg's activities. Hugo had increased the number of scout hounds in the area for that purpose. When suddenly, out of the blue, they are met around the corner by Adolphus and his princess. Trusted patriarch of the Morg family wanted to have a chat before he left, and to clarify some points in their contract. Hugo didn't fully understand what Adolf wanted to discuss, but the representative of the Morg family was interested in the last clause of the contract. He was thinking about how the problem of the ruby mines could be solved peacefully. One problem is taxes for their use. Hugo, it's not to the end of everything that Adolf wants. When suddenly the patriarch's confidant says that this pressing problem can be solved with an engagement. Adolphus proposes that the eldest son of the Baskerville family and the eldest daughter of the Morgs and his niece to form a marriage. This alliance would greatly strengthen the position of both families, both politically and militarily. Plus, Kamu was incredibly beautiful, intelligent, and had no flaws, so she was the perfect bride. But the thing is, the eldest son of the Baskervilles turned 25 this year. That's quite an age difference. Adolf, however, thought that 17 years difference was not such a big deal. He was willing to sell his niece for the well-being of the family. When suddenly the Kamu screamed, "I will not marry a man weaker than my mother. That's my condition." Adolf tries to calm his niece and tells her that if she seeks a groom of a strength equal to her mother's, she will lead her whole life alone. But it's not up to her. Only patriarchs can form alliances at this level. But Kamu was determined not to marry a man weaker than her mother and older than her. With incredible delight, she looked at the Vikir and said, "I want," but the girl didn't have time to say another word. Adolf stopped her. He told her it was impossible. After all, he is a child with a middle name, not even a direct descendant of the patriarch. No matter how strong he is, he will remain a small fish in a big pond. Hugo understood exactly what the princess wanted to say to the Morg family. And for some reason it irritated him. But the most important thing about the betrothal is what's on the minds of the people involved. Suddenly, Hugo asks Vikir what he thinks about it. Kamu looked at the Vikir with incredible hope. Apparently his kindness had captured the girl's heart. "I don't mind," shouted the Vikir after a moment of silence. The young Baskerville's answer made Adolf angry. Now he would have to explain to the patriarch that his daughter would marry a second-rate swordsman. Adolphus couldn't get it into his head how he could be okay with it. Was he more shy than he looked? But the conversation is interrupted by Hugo, who explains to Adolphus that at Baskerville Manor, titles are not important. Direct descendants can make dull people, just as Van Ovs can make great ones. Hugo had 100% confidence in this boy. Despite the enmity between the two families, Adolf recognized Hugo's strength and intelligence. Therefore, he considered his opinion to be authoritative. Also, don't forget that Adolf is a master of the Sixth Circle. He's the strongest of a family of famous mages. He's also a strong supporter of his niece, so it's not a good idea to break up with him. Adolf realized what a great responsibility now lay upon him. For if he married his niece to anyone else, he could lose his head. Betrothal is just a type of family relationship. But it seems that it's not enough for Adolf, even the fact that Vikir is the genius of the Baskerville family. Adolphus was incredibly impressed by the sturdy young man. He'd only heard the legends of the river Styx before. Now he had seen it in action. But the Vikir all this time just stood there in silence. Suddenly he said, "I haven't listened since the moment you said it was wrong to say that. Kamu, I was very surprised at your candor. After all, admitting to a grown man to his face that you didn't listen to him is incredibly brave." Adolphus asked the Hugo's permission to speak to the young lord privately. Hugo tells him sarcastically, "Don't tell me an imperial mage is going to count out an 8-year-old. This request is not from the trusted patriarch of the mortuary family, but from my uncle. Kamu, in every way possible, tried to show you that you shouldn't do that. She knows her uncle too well and realizes how this could end. But uncle, the mood was serious. All the more reason for it to happen sooner or later." And yet, out of politeness, he once again asked permission to speak to the Vikir. Hugo didn't mind. After all, it was the perfect chance to learn something about the Morg family and its top brass. The conversation was very simple. A duel. Before he marries off his favorite niece to someone else, Adolf must see what the suitor is capable of. So he's decided to face Vikir one-on-one. But arrogance, the young lord could not be denied. "If I show you everything I'm capable of, you might not survive." But the Vikir's insolence only served to enrage Adolphus more. So he decided to show him a spell he had created himself. It is a magic pot, which combines the perfect magic of the elements of fire, water, and earth. Adolphus made the conditions that if the Vikir succeeded in getting even one drop of water to come out of the pot, he would win. Adolf Morg wasn't really a significant opponent for him even in his past life. However, this is a good chance to test his strength and abilities. That was one of the reasons why Hugo had agreed to his proposal. I wonder how fast a Vikir would have been able to defeat him in his past life. There was about a 50% chance of killing him and a 10% chance of killing him in a one-on-one encounter. But there's absolutely no point in going all out right now. All we have to do is meet Hugo's expectations. All right, that's enough ado about nothing. It's time to show this old man what the genius of the Baskervilles can do. But it was reckless of him to attack Adolf head-on. Attacks of this nature have no effect on him. Plus, he was a master of shield magic, which is most effective in defending mages against swordsmen. This barrier would be difficult to penetrate with almost any aura blade. To break through it, the Vakir would have to show his best, something he couldn't live with. However, now it was Adolf's turn to attack. These pots are what made him famous, so Vikir should avoid hitting them. His attack speed is levels faster than the Kamus, and accordingly so is his damage. Although Vikir's body has been reinforced with a river of sticks, he can die from magic of such power. Seeing her uncle use one of his strongest spells, Kamu raised a shout for Adolf not to use the power of the pots, for he might kill her fiancé. Hugo, incredibly vigilant, watched their duel. It was silly to deny that Adolf's attacks were very fast, but it was possible to dodge. So he decided not to interfere. Now all the Vakir has to do is show this old man what the young hound dog can do. The fact that he's 8 years since his return, and that he's retained knowledge from his past life, could help him unfocus his attention and catch him off guard.
But then the Vakir gets the idea to eliminate Adolf.
So he began to probe the weaknesses in the wizard's defenses. He could have dealt with him faster, but he needed to use his full potential. Adolf, however, was completely confident in the strength of his protective barrier. He thought the Vakir's sword could never penetrate it. Despite Adolf's words, the Vakir continued to break through his barrier. As a friend, the barrier was cracked. Now the old man finally realized that the guy was attacking the same place on purpose, acting like a machine. When the Vakir's blade did break, Rain laughed and told him to compare the strength of his sword and his shield. I'm bad at focusing on one target, of course. It depends on your opponent. But it was a futile tactic. A piece of the blade broke through the protective barrier and went straight into the pot of water that stood on Adolf's head. Which means that the young lord of House Baskerville has won this battle. I was incredibly shocked that he managed to lose to an 8-year-old swordsman. That's what it means to underestimate your enemies. Kamu was incredibly delighted that Vakir had managed to pass his uncle's test. After all, no one had ever succeeded before, much less an 8-year-old boy. The princess shrieked with delight. It may be a coincidence, but Uncle lost. That means we'll get married. Laughing, Hugo asks her, You really think this is a coincidence? A broken blade was accidentally driven into a pot? Vicar van Baskerville, the young genius of the Baskerville family. Apparently he can become much stronger than he thought. 7 years later, on the Baskerville family's training ground, a seemingly ordinary training session was taking place. The young Baskervilles have improved their swordsmanship skills against a terrible monster. It was a regular group training session. The aim was to improve teamwork skills. This time no one heard the training other than Guide Dog Family Baskerville, Staffordshire Baskerville. He was renowned for his students becoming graceful warriors throughout the empire. Every lesson he taught was invaluable. And this time he advised them that when they met an enemy stronger than them, they should not try to hit life-important organs, but to slow him down. As I expected from the young gentlemen of Highborough, Millborough, and Lowborough, their aura surpasses the strength and form of their peers. With this level of swordsmanship, each of them alone could easily deal with this monster. At the end of the training session, Staffordshire calls up all the students and tells them, Now all the young lords have already reached the level of a low-ranked sword expert. You have all ideally learned the first Baskerville swordsmanship. From now on, your 7 years of training is complete. Unlike this caged bear, the bears of the Forbidden Mountain Peaks are much more common. I want you all to remember that the monster you face today is simply nothing compared to the real ones. Death is always much closer than you think. That's it. Congratulations on completing your training. After completing their 7-year apprenticeship, each Baskerville is required to choose their own type of knight. Most Baskervilles most often choose Dobermans, Pitbulls, or Rottweilers. There are only 7 squads of knights in the Baskerville family. Each was created for a specific purpose: guarding, investigation, defense, assassination, supremacy, direct confrontations, and so on. But the question on the minds of all the graduates was, who will you choose? The most talented and powerful of them all. Vikir van Baskerville. He could have chosen any of the classes, and he would have been the best in each. In the 7 years since, there have been more rumors about him. All of them were true. They say that he is already a high-ranked sword expert and has reached the 3rd fang. That means his strength level is on the same level as a guide dog. Despite this incredible progress, he was dissatisfied with his result. He had planned to be the same age as Hugo. In fact, he was now at the level of a mid-ranked sword graduate and had already discovered 5 techniques. It took him a full 7 years to rise from a low-ranked sword graduate to a mid-ranked ball graduate. He had already surpassed his past self in swordsmanship skills, but still progress was too slow. When suddenly Barrymore comes to the Vakir and tells him that the patriarch has been looking for him, for he has found the perfect place for him. This is the first meeting between the patriarch and Vakir in a very long time. Neither of them is the same person they used to be. It was hard not to notice the new scar on Hugo's face. He got this scar during his encounters with barbarian tribes in the Forbidden Mountain Peaks. He was attacked by one rather skilled barbarian archer. Hugo failed to capture the savage, but he did leave her with a scar to remember her by. This proves once again that you don't want to go to the mountain peaks. Well, that's not what this is about. Hugo congratulated the vicar on completing 7 years of schooling. But the boy didn't come here for exciting stories or congratulations. He wants to know where Hugo has put him. In a past life at this age, he became a member of a Pitbull troupe, and for 2 years went to the Forbidden Mountain Peaks to face countless situations where he risked his life, and then thrown out like an unwanted mongrel on the real battlefield. Upon reaching the age of 15, the Baskerville children are divided into elite and expendable. While the former study for political and administrative positions, the latter die in battle. After experiencing many fights, experienced expendables begin to kill the elite, and the elite in turn reach various high positions in society. But the difference in power between the elite and the battle-hardened consumables fills the 5th Baskerville technique. It was one of the reasons he never got beyond 4th tech in his previous life. Hugo would never let a bastard like him become an elite. But this time it's different. Hugo wants Vikir to try to become a congressman. The office of congressman is an incredibly big responsibility. After all, he governs and makes laws in the territories of the Baskerville families and is in charge of justice. He attracts business to the territory and does other paperwork. Simply put, the vicar will be in charge of all the big and small affairs of the Baskerville family. Hugo offered the position specifically to Vikir because he outperforms his peers by a decade. If the Vikir agrees, he will become vice-consul in a city called Anderog. It didn't take long for Vicky to accept the position. However, he had something he wanted to discuss before he left for Anderog, and he's concerned about the ruby mines and the Morg family. The thing is, Hugo promised a reward if Vikir could win the duel with Adolf. But in all these 7 years, he hasn't asked for anything. However, today he wants to take advantage of this opportunity. Hugo signed the papers appointing vicar consul in this city. He trusted him as himself, and believed that he would not do anything stupid. Vikir, he promised that everything would be done in the best possible way. Their Hugo would be proud of him. And how many times he had heard the word son from the patriarch's mouth. But he still can't get used to it. When Barrymore escorted the young lord out, he told him that the patriarch appreciates him because he didn't send a Vikir to the battlefield right away. He entrusted him with the position of consul of the whole city. In fact, it's the first lesson for the future ruler. Perhaps Hugo is considering Vikir as his replacement. It's better to let it be. If he could use his power as vice-consul, then he could improve his own skills much more safely. He didn't care what the job was. It wouldn't make the memories go away. He could still feel at night the guillotine taking away his head. He was going to make Hugo experience the same thing. Welcome, in the territory of Baskerville, to the town of Anderog. It's a small and quiet town with its own advantages and disadvantages. Rumors of the new vice-consul quickly spread through the city. The court servants discussed his imminent arrival. Many were confused by his young age. However, the Vikir is smart beyond his years. Here the Vikir has arrived, in his new home. However, the staff mistook him for an ordinary boy who had just gotten lost, and asked him to come out. This boy didn't know yet that his new master's shoulder was holding him up. Vikir was incredibly pissed off by this attitude of the staff. He turned and said in a cold, creepy voice, "Get your hand off me now, before I rip it off." The guys decided to turn it into a joke, and asked them to forgive them for this misunderstanding. But the Vikir didn't care about those idiots. He ordered them to get the alcohol and the girls ready. He's going to throw a welcome party for all the elite of this town. Meet this Chihuahua Baskerville. He's the manager of the Androje office, and is in a rather sad situation. He couldn't believe that Vikir had a feast on his first day. Things have been so dire with the budget due to the consul's appeal that the party will make a huge hole in the budget. Unable to contain his emotions, he shouted, "You little brat! Go ahead and ruin it! I'm sure the whole town will be ruined by the time you get here." At his hysterical cries, was interrupted by a low whisper behind him. "You're the office manager." The old man was scared shitless. He thought it was the end of him. However, Vikir decided to overlook this and simply introduced himself. Vikir found it interesting that the Chihuahua didn't have a middle name. And if a person doesn't have a middle name, then he doesn't belong to a family. Simply put, he's just an employee, not blood-related. Chihuahua was skeptical of the Vikir, for he read him as a spoiled fool. However, Wicker was glad he wouldn't have to work with arrogant and purebred Baskervilles. Suddenly he said he'd looked into the Chihuahua's file before he came here, and he found out that he was from this town, so he must be well aware of the situation in the city. Vikir knew a lot about the hard work of humans, so he wasn't going to get in his way. So hopefully they would make a great team. The Chihuahua couldn't believe it was actually true. He asked the young vice consul, "I'm sorry, but is this some new way of making fun of me?" Well, Vikir ignored that stupid question. And after a minute he says there is no problem with federal laws. But the judicial system has a few flaws. Androg's problem is that there are a lot of underground businesses operating in the city. This kind of economy is illegal and therefore not profitable. This problem will not be solved by simply stopping business. The main leaders of this black market will have to be removed. Chihuahuas were a little intimidated by such drastic methods. But you have to admit, they're quite effective. The role of the vice consul in the creation of laws and their implementation. The laws created earlier would also need to be researched. But still, the Vikir decided to add one law right now. He's going to get rid of the black market in a week. But if you have to introduce a new law, you need a good reason. Well, Vikir is too young. He's a political novice who won't even be in office until tomorrow. It would take quite a show to convince the people of this city. So you will need to spread the cheese around to attract the rats. His methods are highly questionable, yet incredibly effective. The next day, people gathered in the main street of Androga, Street Dortmile. The Vikir has been gathering men since dawn. But what he's doing it for? He hasn't told anyone. It will come as a surprise to everyone. When the entire plaza was gathered, Vikir began his speech. Listen up. I'm the newly hired vice consul. I'm sure you've all read the notices posted here. These are the current laws, and nothing has been added to them. Even though the vice consul has changed, the autonomous laws of the Baskerville family will remain unchanged. However, most people didn't take him seriously. They thought he was a juvenile fool. They were sure that nothing at all would change in the city with the arrival of the new vice consul. When he heard his subordinates mistrusting the new vice consul, Chihuahua shut them up and reminded them who was in charge of the city's security during a difficult time. However, the subordinates didn't stop. They thought it would be better for the Chihuahua to be vice consul. After all, a juvenile like Vikir was incapable of making laws in their opinion. During their performance, Wicker heard them perfectly well. I didn't have to listen to those fools whine. If they won't accept the new vice consul the easy way, then we'll have to make them do it the hard way. In a rage with his staff, he shattered the ground beneath his feet. This greatly frightened the townspeople. After calming down, the young lord says, "And I, in the exercise of my authority as vice consul, proclaim a new law, Special Vikir Law, Paragraph 1, Article 1. I will reward and gild anyone who removes that rod." People. Such a law was incredibly surprising. They did not understand why the new vice consul needed it. When people heard about this law, they didn't believe it at first. After all, why would anyone give someone 100 million for pulling a stick? With which law he shocked not only ordinary citizens A and his subordinates, but the Vikir. He looked as confident as possible. He obviously knew what he was doing. Suddenly he shouted, "No one wants to take 100 million for themselves?" In which case he makes another law that says, anyone who pulls out the rod will be immediately rewarded with 1 billion gold coins by order of Wicker van Baskerville. In response to the new law, people began to resent it even more. They thought the Vikir was mocking them, and wanted to make fools of them. The crowd began to shout boisterously that they would not allow themselves to be made fools of. Vikir only listened attentively to all the yelling. Meanwhile, the Chihuahua was already thinking about how to report it to his superiors. When all of a sudden Wicker says that even for that amount of money, the Vikir's face changed dramatically. His eyes went crazy again. In a low, piercing voice, he asked, "Doesn't anyone want to do it now?" The Vikir's face changed dramatically. His eyes went crazy again. In a low, piercing voice, he asked, "Doesn't anyone want to do it now?" The idea that it was a trap was sinking deeper and deeper into people's minds. Some thought the Vikir wanted to kill anyone who tried to pull the rod out. Others thought that the rod was incredibly heavy and it was physically impossible. And still no one dares to try to pull that rod out. Vikir was about to raise the price even higher when a Chihuahua stops him. Says it's going to put a huge hole in the budget. When suddenly, among the several hundred people who stood in the square, only a little girl decided to try to pull the rod. It was a brave little girl named Judy, who was selling flowers. She needs that money for her mother, because she's incredibly sick. This is her only chance to help her mom. The old man tried to stop her and assured her that Vikir would kill her as soon as she got near the rod. And then Judy got the old man to promise that if anything happened to her, he'd take care of her mom. Judy was incredibly worried that the Vikir would actually kill her. But the desire to save her mother was greater than any fear. In a trembling voice, the girl asked the Vikir can she get at least a couple coins if she can't get that rod. But the Vikir remained silent. Well, she had no choice but to try and get him out. She was ready to say goodbye to her life. Suddenly, she picked up this rod and just pulled it out. Her surprise was unparalleled. The people in the square just froze in amazement. They didn't understand what was happening. Judy was even more frightened by the fact that Judy had pulled the rod out so easily. She asked the vice-consul why it was so easy to pull out, but the Vikir was still silent with the face of a mad dog. The battle aura of Baskervilles began to appear around him. Would he really kill this girl? Judy was ready to say goodbye to her head. She thought the reason for her execution would be to insult a nobleman. And even in the last seconds of her life, she thought of her mother. Whew. Vikir was not reaching for a sword, but for a bag of money. Leaning toward her, he whispered, "Here you go. Only 100 million for now. The rest of the money will come later." Judy still couldn't believe it was true. Even 100 million was more than enough to cure her mom. Not only the girl was shocked by this, but also everyone around her, because everyone could have gotten this money. But only she had the courage to speak out. Vikir promised that the rest of the money would be brought directly to her home since it was incredibly heavy. And he would also assign her a guard to keep her safe. And then the Vikir with proudly raised head said, "That is the law. It must be obeyed, whatever it is." Did he do all this to show people he was serious about the law? Judging by the reaction of the people around him, I think it went better than he thought it would. Set as an example to the special law of the Vickers became much more popular than the autonomous laws of the Baskerville family. For relatively little money, he was able to gain the trust of the people. The one who breaks the law gets punished, but the one who follows the law gets rewarded. It was a simple concept that worked on the hearts of the citizens. Word quickly spread through the city about the new vice-consul. After the announcement of the Vickers' special law, the number of crimes has decreased significantly. The number of reported cases has halved. Vicker asked to have a sign put up in his office with the phrase, "Faith in the movement of trees." Just as suddenly, the Chihuahua unexpectedly praised the Vicar's performance in the plaza. After all, in all his 20 years in the position, none of the vice-consuls had ever been able to achieve such a result. Vikir was pleased to hear such words from such an experienced man. The thing was that Vikir realized that just being angry at lawbreakers was not enough. So he thought about how he could attract attention and leave a good impression. Those words made the Chihuahua cry like a little baby. He had been waiting for a man like Vikir for all these long years. And to be fair, it was all done a little later in his past life by Kamu Morg. When she became the head of the family, the crime rate almost reached 0. But because she based her politics on feelings, fear, people didn't like her much. But along with that came a new problem. Since Wicker has promised 10 billion, we need to find a way to fill this huge hole in the budget. Vicker began to mark on the map the places where illegal organizations are currently hiding or will be hiding in the future. He will go to these places and take their black money. Chihuahua was shocked. He knew about the existence of underground bases, but did not understand how Vikir knew about them. After all, he was new to this town, to which the Vikir guffawed and said he could smell them. Naturally, it was a lie. He knows the location of all the underground bases because in his past life, he patrolled these streets every day. With each successive phrase from the Vikir, the Chihuahua was more and more surprised. What amazed him most of all was how much in-depth investigation the Vikir had done before assuming this position. When suddenly one of the consul's assistants runs into the office and says that a request for an interview from the municipality has come in. Vikir expected to be interviewed after what he did. The thing is, the town council is a faction created by the second and third heads of the Baskervilles, which means that they have quite a bit of influence in the community. It's likely the council members want to discuss some details about the Vikir special law. It means the rats finally smelled the cheese, because previously they were enriched by a loophole in the law. It was all part of the Vikir's plan. In that case, let's start exterminating the insects that have been eating this town. Luxury Hotel, Anderogue City, Burning Star. In the very back of the building, there's one secret room. A so-called VIP room that costs 10 million for 6 hours. It was in the middle of a party. The participants were the 7 people who founded the Teenage Self-Governance Committee municipality. In other words, the cream of the crop. They're basically just kids. 7 heads of Baskerville territory. They know nothing of simple human problems. They've been swimming in mountains of gold since they were kids. They didn't think of other people as people at all. They had the waiters lick the spilled champagne for fun. I think that says a lot. This blonde man's father, the most powerful man in the whole of Baskerville territory, apart from the Baskervilles themselves. He was so rich that he could easily spend millions on frivolous things every day. His father's main business is the slave trade. And lately, the business has been making an incredible amount of money as the Baskervilles have expanded their territories, and they've been able to capture a lot of savages. The only reason they can afford to be so lavish is because they're not in the imperial capital, where their kind are under close surveillance. The Baskervilles have better things to do than keep an eye on scum like them. Some of them even thought the Baskervilles were their lapdogs, because they protect them. But that's not the main reason. Previously, there were 8 powerful families. However, one of the messy Madrano families was sneakily framed. As a result, the Baskervilles were forced to exterminate an entire family. When all of a sudden these little idiots start talking about rumors of a new vice-consul, when suddenly one of them said that he had already invited the new vice-consul for an interview. A lot of people were worried about his name. The prefix Van meant he was illegitimate. However, they knew that he had thrown a huge ball in honor of his arrival. So I think they have a lot in common. But they've never been so wrong in their lives, as suddenly one of them gets the idea to gain Vikir's trust. A huge party with the best wine and a woman. The others thought it was a pretty good idea too, except they decided to teach Vir a lesson and give him the bill for the party, to see how he reacts. Their party continues. They have girls coming to join them. Their arrogance and self-confidence is astounding. Suddenly, together with the girls, an unknown guy who introduced himself as their friend entered the room. Whoa! When the butler heard that this young gentleman was a stranger to the young gentleman, he grabbed him by the hair and was about to lead him out of the room. Of course the Vikir won't let it go. The Vikir broke his arm without a shred of doubt. That will teach him a lesson for the future. You should know your superiors by sight. Stepping closer to the member of the patronage, he said, "My name is Vikir van Baskerville." When they heard that name, their faces froze in horror and cold sweat ran down their cheeks. They hadn't expected to see him here. In a trembling voice, one of them asked, "Vice-consul, what brings you here?" It's like they forgot they invited him. They realized that the vice-consul had caught them on the hot seat, and if anything, their families could be put out of business. Even though they hadn't expected to meet the Vikir so early, they weren't about to give up on their idiotic plan to make him pay for the party. But Vikir didn't come here to talk. He came here to put these pompous idiots in their place. Only when the aura awakened, the hound dog, they were frightened like little girls. How dare they have the audacity to think of the Baskervilles as their tame dogs? That's power. He was only able to destroy the pyramid of glasses with the power of his aura. That'll let them know who they're dealing with. It took them seconds to realize they were messing with a sword alumnus. They were idiots, but they were smart enough not to get into a fight with him. One of them was even a mid-ranking expert, so he understood better than anyone what the Vikir was capable of. Vikir, with dead as a shark's eyes, walked up to one of the guys and whispered, "Listen to me carefully," before the Vikir can finish his sentence, as this guy speaks in a trembling voice, says, "I swear we wanted it all to happen." Vikir asks him in surprise, "Of course, who else is supposed to pay for your party? Did you really mean to leave the bill to me?" In an attempt to save their lives, they started shouting in droves that they would never do such a thing, given the fact that he's a member of the Baskervilles, when suddenly, rather abruptly, they changed the subject and started discussing the sorry state of the underground. And all this was done on purpose to make sure that Vikir could deal with such small things. Of course, Vikir didn't believe all this nonsense. The owner is allowed to check his dogs all he wants, but no one has argued to the contrary. A dog is not allowed to test its master. Those words will be etched in their minds forever. The Vikir thrust his fingers deeper and deeper, so that the scars that would remain would always remind him of the incident. Suddenly the Vikir speaks. "You guys seem to have lost all fear with money and power. That's why you've never seen real horror." After some thought, Vikir decided not to let him live. It would follow a great lesson for the others. Towering over the half-breathing body, the Vikir speaks. "Do you know why it ended the way it did? If not, you deserve the same fate." In a panic, everyone started shouting that they knew why Mr. Vice-Consul had done this. Once again it was a deception. Not the first time they had lied to the Baskerville family. Vikir only smiled and said that in that case, they should all be beaten. Vikir has charged everyone with a number of serious crimes, such as kidnapping, slave trade, and corruption. And for disrespecting the Baskervilles, he'll blow their heads off, because they had committed a number of serious crimes. Vikir decided to carry out the lynching immediately. It was unbelievably cruel, but the next people who take their place will know the consequences if they contradict the law. A week later, a secret prison under the consul's administration. Usually this prison is empty. Not this time. Vikir brought his trusty Chihuahua partner to admire his catch, and the first steps toward the perfect city. Yet the Vikir spared the representatives of the municipality. He decided that they should be brought to justice. Of course, they couldn't say anything clever except threats. When the Chihuahua saw their faces, he was horrified. He was ready to support Vikir in everything, but advised him not to beat him so hard next time. Vikir silently listened to all of Chihuahua's advice and told him that he hadn't tried yet, because they deserved more punishment. By their looks alone, it was clear they had not learned their lesson. So Vikir decided to execute them after sunset, hoping that out of fear they will admit their guilt and try to atone for it. But the Vikir quickly changed his mind. He decided that he would execute not only them, but everyone associated with them. The Chihuahua was speechless when he heard that. Naturally, when they heard that they were going to be executed, they all immediately began to ask for forgiveness and to be released. Some of them even admitted their guilt and promised to return everything they had stolen and give away everything they had, as long as the Vikir let them live. The Chihuahua had a logical question. What was the vice consul going to do with their families? After all, if you leave them alive, sooner or later they will take revenge. Vikir was quick to reassure the Chihuahua. He said that since their children had direct ties to the criminal organizations of the city, he was going to disenfranchise their family. Plus, the Vikir has decided to execute them without witnesses. If he can't find witnesses, he'll create them. He doesn't care about the consequences. After all, a disaster is coming soon, and he will most likely be sent to the battlefield in the near future. Even otherwise, he will enter the academy and leave this place. Before the execution, as is customary, the Vikir read out the charges. Each of them was accused of kidnapping and selling people, corruption, threats, blackmail, and even murdering officials, despite the fact that some of the prisoners pleaded guilty. The rest claimed they did not do any of the above, and only if there were witnesses would they admit their punishment. The Vikir expected this. He knew he would execute them anyway, witnesses or not, so having witnesses is just a small formality. However, the Vikir noticed that they didn't want to ruin their reputation with the family even with their own deaths. That seemed interesting enough to him. Suddenly, a mysterious man enters the dungeon. Vikir was obviously happy to see him, but the Chihuahua wasn't expecting to see him here. Who is this man? From the man's appearance, he looked like an assassin. Suddenly he said he'd run an errand for the vice consul. What did he bring in that sack? Whatever it is, it looks like Vikir really needs it. Oi damn, now it all makes sense. There were many different tools in the bag. The man was indeed a thug, though even he was surprised at the set of tools the Vikir asked for. After all, in all his 30 years in the business, he'd never seen anyone use them. But the Vikir said that where he's from, they use them all the time. This bounty hunter jokingly asked if the vice consul was from hell, all of which brings a sense of nostalgia to the Vikir. Thanks to some of these tools, even imprisoned demons gave away all their secrets during the Age of Destruction. Well, now that the tools are in place and all preparations are complete, it's time to get down to business. Vikir was sure they wouldn't last a minute. They would confess to all their crimes and be punished. And the fear that he doesn't feel now will only increase the pain. Before proceeding, the Vikir asked them not to say anything. He wants to renew nostalgic memories and reminisce about the old days. Rumors spread quickly throughout the city. The Androg citizens spoke only of the fact that 7 members of the major families who profited from crime had been arrested. This news was on the lips of the entire city 24 hours a day. They were hated by absolutely every citizen. They treated the peasants like garbage, and so many people began to wonder what would happen to them. After all, the charge they're accused of, the punishment should be execution. Half of the people thought they would be, and the other half thought that the vice consul would not dare to do it. All the townspeople were arguing about what the new vice consul would do. It was a game between the new politician and the main families that could easily have ended in the Vikir's favor. As the citizens had supposed, 7 to him: Blank, Pure, Liup, Chanel, Ferragamo, Hermos, and Paredes sent as an apology to the new vice consul a negligible sum. The local authorities decided to agree to release their children for a small reward, and the prisoners would be released, simply reprimanded by their fathers and heads of families. Although it's more accurate to say it's the outcome everyone's been waiting for. And what was the surprise of the people? Until in the center of the town square, 7 heads were displayed. Just the kind of man a Vikir would expect in this town. were the 7 heads on whose faces were frozen with horrifying expressions that showed the hellish pain experienced before execution. Documents developing over their heads detailed all the crimes for which they were being punished. People were surprised to see how many crimes they'd committed. But what was more surprising was that the new vice-consul had dared to go against the main families. The fact that there were even nobles and famous families on the treasury changes everything. When they hear a declaration of war, they're sure to start planning something. And when war breaks out, there's only one outcome: the destruction of one side. And the Interrogating will become a veritable battlefield. As a friend, the Vakir ordered the Chihuahua to get ready, for he would be part of the next operation. He obviously didn't expect it, because he's just a manager and nothing more. And in general, the whole situation scared him a lot. The operation has begun. First, the Chihuahua infiltrated a social gathering, where all the intellectuals gathered to buy new toys. The Chihuahua was very worried, because he realized the responsibility that lay on his shoulders. To be quite honest, he was a little doubtful about the vice-consul's plan. The first important step in his operation was to sell himself as a slave. Despite the fact that human trafficking is forbidden in the territory of the Baskerville family, such activities are quite common, and so the Vakir decided to catch them all at once. It was a dark night, somewhere on the outskirts of the city of Underdog. In a huge tent, spread out in a secluded place, luxurious carriages began to gather. There were so many people that the organizers didn't know if there were enough seats for everyone. Today is an important day, the day the slave trade was discovered. Of course, it was illegal, which the Baskervilles were not informed of, which was a bad decision. Kidnapped barbarians, nobles, and commoners were put up for sale as merchandise. "Welcome. We welcome you all to the circus," said a guy in a clown mask, in a nice, neat suit. Apparently he's in charge. This guy stood at the entrance and checked everyone who entered the tent. "Oh, are you from the Mangblang family?" "This stylish handwriting is the standout highlight of the Mangblangs," he said, looking at the guests' papers. "Judging by the purpose of your visit written here. Are you here for a sale?" the inspector asked. It was actually a Chihuahua underneath the mask. "You?" "Right, I'm here to sell," he said. He had come to sell Vakir. The checker was a bit wary of this, as people of their kind are their good customers, always buying slaves in bulk. "I'm concerned about one question. Did you not like the slaves you bought at the last auction?" he asked. "That's not the point. I'm always satisfied with the quality of the goods here," said the undercover Chihuahua. "Black hair and red eyes. You brought something very rare," said the examiner. "I'll take responsibility and sell it for a great price," he added. "Yes, please," said the Chihuahua in a trembling voice. Soon the large-scale circus performance began. The organizer stood in the middle of the tent. Beneath him was a shield sign with 2 swords. He stood in a revealing pose, laughing. All the people froze, waiting for the performance. They say that unusual slave shows are popular in the Empire. I'm not much interested in such a thing. It's enough for slaves to be cute and attractive, he said. People began to smile and wait to see what would happen next. "I hope there will be a lot of worthwhile merchandise today," spoke of his preferences to the organizer. "So, at this auction, we managed to secretly grab the spoils of the hunters of the Baskerville family. The first item was a level A monster with 19 hearts, Murcielago, an infernal buffalo residing in the otherworld depths of hell. Until all of its 19 hearts stop, it won't stop attacking. Skin, meat, bones, organs, and no waste. The auction starts at 100 million gold pieces. The masked guests start bidding in the auction and support such a sum. Someone gives 100 million, someone gives 140 million, 200 million, even 250 million. Who would give more than 250? It was sold for 250 million. The auctioneer hit the table with his hammer and the item sold. The next product came on stage. Everyone immediately began to name their price. 20 million, 60 million, and even 100 million, without announcing the item itself. The organizers were getting nervous after all. They weren't going to sell this. "So, the next item," announces the auctioneer, and a man from his team comes up to him and says, "Huh? You're gonna sell that too?" "I'll try to sell it. If I do, don't blame me," the auctioneer added. "Friends, a very special item has arrived. A very rare item brought by slave traders from the deep jungle," the auctioneer announced brightly. "She's from a martial tribe from the jungle of the Red-Black Mountain." The girl was scared, her eyes literally burning with fear. She had a strange short haircut, elf-like ears, and bright golden eyes. She was wearing some kind of sack instead of clothes, wrapped in twine. She's a barbarian from Balak. "Are you not burning to tame this fierce slave?" the auctioneer asked the audience. "This is your chance to test your slave skills," he complimented. Someone in the audience shouted out, "Why is he selling that?" "So let's start the auction at 5 million, said the host. But all the people in the audience just fell silent and didn't make a sound. "No one wants to? In that case, let's lower the bid. 3 million, he said. The auctioneer began to get frustrated, as no one wanted to buy the barbarian. "Hey, I'll give you 1 million with my eyes closed." Some even started yawning from boredom. People wanted to move on to the next product and end this mayhem. The organizers decide not to sell this item. The auctioneer's boss was angry with him because he told him to bring only tested items. He ordered him to get rid of her. The barbarian was frightened. The boss came up to her and hit her in the stomach with all his might, causing her mouth to bleed. She was in great pain. She even lost consciousness, and he had to carry her on his shoulder to the chamber. As he carried her away, the auctioneer tried to entertain the audience. "Ha ha, friends, there's been a little embarrassment," he said. "So, as an apology, we will begin the auction of the finest items." The auctioneer brought a long-haired, red-eyed guy who had been brought here by Chihuahua-san to the stage. It was Vicar. As soon as he stepped onto the stage, all the guests immediately cheered. "Mommies," said one of the girls in the audience. Vicar had a superb statue, a pumped-up, trim body, beautiful floor-length black hair, and such penetrating red eyes. The auctioneer started to describe it, that it is quite docile, you won't have to train it much. The quality of this item is inherently awesome. You can claim high competition. Girl number 7 immediately offered a high sum of 600 million. The host was pleased with this, because he had not yet called the bid, and the guests had already offered so much. The number 10 man offered 800 million, which didn't piss off the previous girl by a long shot. "What? You're a man!" she said angrily. "What does this have to do with my gender?" Number 10 replied rudely. She didn't understand what a man needed a slave for, but number 10 told her it was none of her business. Just then, another man offered as much as 900 million. The man at number 99 shouted out an exorbitant sum. It was as much as 6 billion. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. He'd never heard numbers like that at his auctions before. People began to turn around and look for who this rich man was that was offering so much money. 6 billion. Who will offer more? The host asked. It was none other than Baron Gambino of Jitnitsa. He looked like an average rich man, a pile of gold on his hands, a gaudy fur coat, a strange hairstyle. There are a lot of rumors about him. One of them is that he rose by taking over underground funds. How much of that is true, we'll never know. The Baron's assistant asked him, "Isn't that too high a rate?" To which he replied, "The capital would pay even more for a slave with such white skin. I'll resell him and make a profit." She tried to calm him down a bit and lower the rate. "Even so, 6 billion is already too much. Besides, you'll only be able to resell it after it matures, right?" the assistant asked. He asked her to shut up and stay out of the way. "Sindavendi, I sheltered you when you had nowhere else to go. How dare you look down on your master?" the Baron asked angrily. She lowered her eyes to the floor and remained silent. "If no one is willing to offer more, the item will be sold to customer number 99, said the auctioneer. Vicar was led to the Baron. "Ooh, he looks even better up close," said the Baron. "You're mine now. Don't be afraid. I'm not bad," he said. From that time on, he became Baron Gambino's property. The Baron had already thought up a couple of games for him and his slave. Now he can't wait to try it out. Vicar held out his shackled hands to the Baron. He was most likely asking for the chains to be removed from him. But then the impossible happened. The slave broke the chains to pieces with his strength. Everyone was shocked by such an act. Sindavendi even opened her mouth in surprise. When he broke the chains, he said, "I like games." One step by Vicar, and the ground beneath the feet of the Baron and his assistant was gone. They were thrown off by such a hard impact on the ground. They both fell to the ground and could no longer get up to say anything to him. "How's that for a game?" Vicar asked. He touched the Baron, leaned over to him, and said it was called Spear and Shield. "I'll be the spear, you be the shield. If you hold out, victory is yours," he said. His eyes were maddeningly red. Something terrible was happening to the Baron. He was screaming in pain. "Cindy! Guards!" he shouted. The Baron's last words were the phrase, "I'm dying." He fell to the ground and never got up again. Baron Gambino passed out, tears streaming from his eyes and white foam pouring from his mouth. Cindy was distraught at the loss of someone she loved, for he was all she had. "In that case, I win," said the slave. He pulled off his wig of long black hair. Cindy was shocked. "You," she said. She recognized him. It was the same Vicar van Baskerville. The auctioneer didn't know where to put himself. A man from the audience said, "The new subconsul of the city of Underdog? Where did he come from here?" Also someone said, "Mr. Subconsul punished very harshly this time too." Unfortunately, that's the only way people start to realize something. Mr. Vicar, looking at the auctioneer, said, "Circus, haha. A very appropriate name for today's venue." The gentleman demonstrated his power to the audience. He said that all those present, let them not even think of going home safe and sound. When Vicar took off his wig, everyone saw his true appearance and was horrified at his cruelty. The auctioneer was horrified. He glared at him and even gritted his teeth in anger. "Who cares if he's subconscious or not?" yelled the auctioneer, trying to save his auction from failing. "He's unarmed at all. Finish him off," he ordered, and men with guns rushed toward the subconsul. There were 3 angry men flying at Vicar at once. But there was no fear in his eyes, only confidence in his victory. His hand turned black. Red light and lightning bolts formed around Vicar. He killed anyone who wanted to attack him with one swipe of the ball. His eyes glowed bright red. It seems like the auctioneer has seen this viscous red aura somewhere before. He probably knows something about eye. Vicar's next opponent was a masked man with a chain on the end of which was a cannonball. They engaged in combat. The master was as if under the influence of some demon. His eyes were mad. The masked man, he already realized he was finished. Vicar broke the chain and the core with a single sword stroke. He also cut his opponent in half. "Graduate," he said, "though he is of the Baskerville family, but to be an alumnus at such a young age," the presenter said. The auctioneer was angry at Mr. Chihuahua. "The graduate is the best weapon representing the country's national strength. In that case, we can't expect victory." "Mr. Subconsul, I didn't think your sword skills were so extraordinary," said Chihuahua. But then Chihuahua, Vicar's trusty sidekick, realized he had blurted out a little too much. The men who wanted to attack Vicar started laughing and saying, "Look here, Subconsul." But he only turned his head and looked at them in bewilderment. Then something happened that Vicar didn't expect. The auctioneer began to threaten him with the death of his assistant by holding a knife to his neck. "Now drop your weapon and surrender, or your employee is finished," said the auctioneer. But Vicar didn't drop his weapon, whereupon the auctioneer ordered him to do it quickly. You could see in Mr. Chihuahua's eyes that he was scared, but he was so devoted to his boss that he didn't mind giving his life for him. He looked at Vicar and said, "Mr. Subconsul, don't worry, I'm fine, just be careful." The auctioneer didn't like this move and said, "What are you doing? Are you sick? Do you have a lot of strength?" To which he replied, "There is no place for injustice in my dictionary. I'd rather die than frame my boss." "What are you coddling with that hypocritical look on your face?" The auctioneer angrily asked Vicar. "Secretary Chihuahua, I knew of your boundless loyalty," he said. Vicar chuckled and said, "Don't worry. When I was checking out of the Baskerville mansion, the owner handed me a hidden map. He lifted one pant leg, and underneath it was tied some kind of dud." "Whistle! And what are you going to do with it?" the auctioneer asked anxiously. "That whistle." Chihuahua knew exactly what kind of instrument it was. It wasn't just a whistle, but a whistle to summon someone. Vicar took the whistle between his lips and blew it with all his might. The sound of the whistle was so deafening that people's ears began to hurt. It felt like it was ringing in the innermost parts of the brain. The people in the audience started screaming from the pain in their ears. The auctioneer and Chihuahua waited to see who would come running to the master's call, and so Vicar finished blowing, lowered the whistle. Now the men stood waiting for the one they would soon see, but some time has passed, and still no one has come. People were beginning to calm down. The auctioneer was still holding the assistant hostage. He looked at Vicar and mumbled. Nothing happened. A smile of relief even crept across his face. "Can only scare with a nasty loud sound?" the auctioneer asked. All the auctioneer was already happy, he said. "Even though you're a senior, you still can't do it." But then he felt a strange sensation in the area of his neck, as if something had touched it. Behind him stood some suspicious man who made a deep cut on the auctioneer's neck with one hand. He could only say, "No." This strange man was dressed in a black cloak with red trim. He had a golden emblem on his cloak. It was a mouth with teeth. He put his sword in its scabbard. His face was stony. He didn't feel anything. It wasn't the first time for him. Some dude decided to stand up for the auctioneer. He swung his sword and said, "Hey, you!" The strange guy didn't even glance at his opponent, and immediately used some red beam demon magic. All the people around were covering their faces with their hands, for the black and red damask filled the entire hall. Vikir was pleased with his assistant's work. He looked at him proudly and nodded to him. Turns out this man didn't come alone. There was an army of them with those gold tooth emblems. They have all come to Mr. Vikir's call and await further instructions. One of the crowd said, "Are they? It's not them, is it? Please, not that." Apparently they had already guessed who it was standing in front of them. Cindy noticed a sign on them in the shape of fangs on their chests. "I've definitely heard something about him," she said. "This is the most ferocious knight unit in the entire empire without a remnant. Famous for the fact that every one of the 100 knights is an alumnus. A knightly troop of Baskervilles called Pitbull." Cindy was very scared. She didn't want to die in a place like this. There were tears in her eyes and terror on her face. The unexpected act for everyone was Vikir's decision. He stood in front of her and told them not to touch her. Since he was the one who had summoned the Pitbull troop, they knelt down to him and stayed out of the way of the late Baron's defenseless assistant. Mr. Vikir ordered the others to be killed. He must have felt pity for this girl, for she was alone and had no one. He also told the quiet ones not to touch them, but not to spare them. Cindy had no choice but to bend her knee as well. Vikir recalled his conversation with his father, how he told him he believed in him and that he wouldn't do anything stupid. Hugo put a lot of emphasis on military power. "It's a good thing I got the Pitbulls," said Vikir. And that's when the real meat grinder started. The Pitbulls attacked the men and spared no one as the master had commanded. One guy got down on the floor and said quietly under his breath, "First we have to lie down. I'll run as soon as it stops." But he was quickly found. A warrior from the squad came up to him, sweat dripping from his face, and he was afraid he was going to be killed. He raised his head, showed his hands, and asked him to handcuff him rather than kill him. The warrior answered him that they don't carry such things with them. It's an unnecessary burden. He swung his sword and cut off his legs in one precise blow. Vikir was approached by his uncle. He was clearly a handsome man with money. He had many scars on his face, a fur coat, and a cigar sticking out of his mouth. "How do you like my pit bulls, nephew? Happy?" he asked. Vikir dressed and at the same time replied, "Very much so, Uncle Bostoner. If you need help, just say the word." The uncle raised his darkened glasses and winked at his nephew. "Uncle Vikira is the captain of the Baskerville Night Squad. His full name is Boston Terrier Le Baskerville. Vikir, now I understand why Hugo's brother is so interested in you. So smart and tough for his 15 years, Uncle added. The uncle patted his nephew on the head and said, "Join our troop later. I'll take care of you." To which Vikir replied that he would definitely think about it. As soon as Vikir finished getting dressed, he rushed away from the place because he has his own urgent matters to attend to. "And even had the guts to ignore me. Now I want him even more," said the uncle to himself, looking at his nephew. "How hard it is with him," said as Vikir walked away. Vikir was walking swiftly somewhere. It seemed to be somewhere not far from here. He walked into a strange place that had a bunch of big cages. This must be where they keep the goods for auction. "It's definitely around here somewhere," he said, and walked further down the hall. Vikir reached the end of the corridor, where there was a safe with noblemen's money. Everything would go back to the mayor's office. Tax security was assured. "It is not my pleasure to contribute to the Baskervilles' estate, but that is not what matters now," said Vikir sadly. But his true purpose in coming to the warehouse was not money. He walked over to one of the cages and took the cloth off it. Vikir was surprised at what he saw. His eyes widened and his jaw dropped. There was someone coughing in that cage. It was the barbarian from the auction. They didn't want to buy. She was crying in pain. She needed his help. Vikir squatted down and looked at her. He wondered how to save her. "She must have been beaten up," he said. She really didn't look good, all bruised and bruised. Vikir remembered that he had a special healing potion with him. He reached into his back pocket to retrieve it. He had 2 vials in there, one with a blue liquid and one with a red liquid. "Consider yourself lucky. I got this potion from my squad, so here's my blessing for you," he said. He poured the liquid from the vial into her mouth. At first nothing happened. She lay like that with pain all over her body. But after a couple minutes, her body glowed with a red light. It was Baskerville magic. She healed and opened her eyes. Of course, right away she was a little shocked. She was very scared, for she didn't know Vikir. "What are you so scared of?" he asked. The girl sat very tense, hands clenched into fists. Vicar asked her to get out of here. It's very dangerous to stay here. She looked at him with a piercing stare. Probably from fright, she didn't know what to do or where to go. Vicar spoke to her in her native tongue. After countless battles with barbarians in a past life, I have begun to understand their language on a basic level. Run away, he said. The girl started to say something quickly, as if she was angry about something. I'm not that good at barbaric, Vicar said. She got up and stepped off the cage, then walked towards the stage. As she left, she said something in barbaric to Vicar in her wake. But it was cute, so he thought it was definitely something good. I'll take that as a thank you, said Vicar. He liked to help all creatures in need, so this was especially gratifying to him. Now he needed to find what he'd really come to this warehouse for. There was a cloth on the floor, like it was covering something. Found it, Vicar said quietly. He lifted the cloth to make sure it was exactly what he was looking for. Underneath the cloth was one of the auction items, the corpse of a murcielago, the same one they bought at the beginning of the auction. Luckily, he hadn't been butchered yet. Vicar activated his demon power. His hand turned red and emitted black lightning bolts. A sword emerged from his hand. With it, he will use it to get what he needs. It's been a while since we've had a level A monster, Beelzebub. Calm down, I'll feed you now, he addressed his demon. There were already many rumors in Underdog about the new subconsul's case yesterday, how he instantly crushed criminal organizations. People spoke of nobles and officials who participated in the illegal slave auction being taken to the Underdog prison with their limbs cut off. That day, Underdog's huge devil's lair, the burning mansion, was burned to the ground. No one was spared by the Pitbull squad. The heads of the VIPs of this lair were on display. There was a bench in the alley near the mansion, and barrels with their heads on it. And people became more alert to criminal activity. And 7 families who lost their children wrote complaints to the government. There were a lot of letters with red stamps, but their answer was categorical. For criminals engaged in the illegal slave trade, the consequence can only be the death penalty, said the subconsul. The bills rendered to the 7 criminals are recorded in the ledger, and all records of the money spent by them are obtained. These cases are being formally investigated by the Baskervilles, into which the imperial family will certainly be privy. Since then, the protests of the 7 families have ceased. In the end, the heads of these families showed up in person at the government in an absurd situation. They had to beg their son's murderer on their knees for forgiveness. Mr. Subconsul's answer was simple. All the black ledgers from the Hot Mansion have already been investigated, and based on the constitution of the Dominion of Baskerville, all 7 families will be subject to requisition, he said. That is, the prior seizure from the owner of his property. And treason is punished very severely. 3 families will be destroyed for it. Since the moment the new subconsul took office, the blood on the execution floor had not had time to dry. The vile blood of the vermin that destroyed the city. As a result, government officials and their contractors needed labor, and the unemployment rate in Underdog dropped significantly. All the people took to the square with posters of Wickier. Increased tax revenues due to the collapse of the underground economy led to the city being blessed. Thus, Wickier's reputation among the inhabitants grew day by day. Mr. Subconsul, your coffee is ready. Chihuahua brought him his favorite black coffee with milk, but Vicar wasn't too happy about it, he told him. He'd better concentrate on his robot, and there was no need to bring him coffee. This is my personal thanks to you. You saved me that day, said the assistant. Vicar said coffee was too little for saving his life. How so? 2 sugar cubes, 2 spoons of cream, and about the same amount of water, the aide said. The subconsul decided to inquire about the manuscript training Chihuahua. Can you take a look once? Vicar held out his piece of paper to the aide. You've only recently started training and you already write so beautifully, said Chihuahua in surprise. I have a long way to go before you, replied Vicar. Incredible man. He's just learned the letters and he's already written new laws, and he has excellent legal knowledge, said Chihuahua. Mr. Subconsul to continue his painstaking work on documents and manuscripts. If Vicar stays in town, Androdog will become even more developed and progressive. Night had fallen. There were clouds in the sky and not a single star was visible. The light of the bow was visible through the bars of the prison cell. Today was a full moon. Chained in this cell was the very same Baron's assistant that Vicar had rescued at the circus. Vicar walked up to her and said, I'm sorry I didn't come right away. I've been busy with various things lately. She was blindfolded. Your name is Cindy Wendy St. Rose, right? He asked. Why did you spare me? Cindy asked. Elementary, I want to ask you a couple questions, Vikir said, after which he removed the blindfold from her eyes. And that's the reason for my salvation? She asked. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't work out her salvation with questions alone. Vikir did his best to explain to her that thanks to her, the lowly homosexual Baron Gambino was able to increase his power in a short period of time. Isn't that so? He asked. Behind his research, she has good earning skills. If her talent wasn't on the dark side, she'd make a good merchant or financier. Vikir promised that after answering all the questions, he would let Sandy go. Otherwise, she's going to really regret not cooperating. Cindy agreed to all of the sub-consul's demands, and they proceeded with the so-called interrogation. She warned him that she would try to answer anything she could answer. Vikir agreed. Do you think I'm good at law enforcement? Vikir asked. To which Cindy replied, I think you've made it to the magistrate level. Vikir warned her that if she lied, he wouldn't be able to keep his promise. I think you're doing it wrong, Cindy said. Vikir was amused by this. He didn't hide his smile. He rose from his chair and stood across from Cindy, one hand clenched into a fist. But Vikir didn't swing at her, just took a light grip on her chin. Specifically, he asked. Cindy was a little scared. She didn't know what the sub-consul's next actions would be. After all, he is very unpredictable. Well, speak up. What am I wrong about? Vikir stepped away from her and asked the question to listen to her carefully. Cindy hesitated for a long time to answer that question honestly, and through gritted teeth she did. In that from long ago in government. And a major factor in the moral principle is beneficence, Cindy said. You used intimidation to catch criminals and strengthen your own authority. In the future, you will have to kill or injure many commoners, which will cause lasting resentment among the people. Cindy explained. She added that, moreover, the Baskerville family would not approve of your influence over Underdog if it was greater than that of the head of the family. Vikir summarized. In general, the indignation of the people will fall upon me, as well as the wrath of the Baskervilles. Vikir asked her for advice. Then what do you think I should do? Cindy had an idea. It was that he would have to hand over all authority to the Baskervilles, and return the town to its owner. After that, he would need to go to a place suitable for his age. For example, it could be the plains of the Red Black Mountain, or the Central Academy of the Empire. And one must not show his abilities to others, but rather develop as inconspicuously as possible. Then the head of the Baskerville family will evaluate it with a worthy criticism. Cindy Wicker didn't seem to like that speech very much. Sounds like you're telling a hunting dog to tear its master's throat out, he said. Everything around him turned black and red. His eyes began to glow with a red beam. But Cindy didn't give up. She didn't show him that she was scared or that she wanted to run away. She wanted to help him. It's the only way you'll avoid problems, Cindy said confidently and insistently. Vikir put his foot on his leg, smiled a little sly grin and said, I like it. Cindy was shocked at what she heard. She thought he was going to kill her right there. He got up from his chair, took a key out of his pocket and said, That's a good suggestion. You can read my mind. As promised is free, said Vikir. Mr. Sub-Consul keeps his promises. He slipped the key into the keyhole of the handcuffs and opened them. While Cindy was adjusting the sleeves on her blouse, she asked, Are you really letting me go? I always keep my word, said Vikir. Cindy got up from her knees and walked toward the exit. In that case, I hope you don't regret your decision, she said. Lastly, Vikir asked, Do you know the Mesimadnaro clan? Cindy stopped and thought for a moment. Vikir decided to tell her the real story of the Underdog families. There weren't really 7. There was another merchant family, the richest of the local families. The 8th family, the Mesimadnaro family. There was an accident in this family. At that time, the youngest son of the head of the Mesimadnaro family had to demonstrate his sword skills at his birthday celebration. He was a young boy, about 10 years old. The demonstration began. There were a lot of guests from all over the country that day, and the representatives of the Baskerville family there were simply amazed at the boy's technique. The young boy's sword skills were a Baskerville style, secretly learned only in their family. This news immediately reached the House of Baskerville. They decided that a level 1 military secret ducking had occurred and released the hunting dogs. They put down many innocents. On that day, the Mesimadnaro clan was completely wiped out. But there were other intruders. Devils from 7 different families stole the book of sword-wielding from the Baskerville family, and then trained Mesimadnaro's son. Cindy was at a loss as to why she wanted the story about the 8th 7 and what it had to do with her. But there was still one survivor of their kind. 7 idiots secretly stole a 1-year-old girl. Because of her unprecedented beauty, the little girl had to go through cruel and shameful tortures. It's even hard to say the details out loud. I don't want to hear it anymore, Cindy said angrily, and rushed for the exit. This story has a sequel, said Vikir. He was sure she would be interested in hearing it to the end. A long time passed, and a new subconsul arrived in town. He brought out all their old vices and punished them severely. 7 idiots were the triggers of all the trouble. The new subconsul tortured those assholes mercilessly and made them pay for every sin. And then they left a will. There were tears in Cindy's eyes. The will said, "We ask forgiveness for all our mortal sins." She began to guess that she was that surviving child. She was so angry at them. Forgiveness? Who were they asking for it? "What do you think yourself?" Vikir asked. Tears flowed from her eyes. They were tears of resentment. Before the sole survivor of the Mesimadnaro family, under the pseudonym Sindivendi St. Rose, she said. "And how can I believe you? How can I believe that you tortured them, that you made them beg for forgiveness?" she asked. "At least that," said Vikir, after which he lit one of the torches. He invited her to see for herself, and they walked along the corridor of prison cells. They approached one of the cells and Vikir said, "Look here." Her eyes grew huge with surprise and horror. In the cell, she saw the very people who had tortured her all her life. Some of them Vikir had left alive. They left some messages in the cell that they asked for forgiveness and that they were wrong. Cindy couldn't hold back her tears. She cried in pain and grief. After what she saw, she fell to her knees and thought only of how she could avenge her kind, except that the vengeance for the Mesimadnaro clan did not end, only in their deaths in terrible agony. "For there is one more family left," said Vikir. "Hate the Baskervilles Sindivendi St. Mesimadnaro. You have every right to do so," said the subconsul. Cindy didn't understand Vikir's purpose. "You're a Baskerville man yourself, so why are you helping me?" "You ask stupid questions," said Vikir. Cindy rose from her knees and said, "I hear you." She turned to him and said, "Vikir van Baskerville, I will not be in debt." "Whatever you accomplish, I'll make sure you always have money," Cindy said, leaving the place. Vikir smiled in her wake and said to himself, "Look, I remembered. It was morning the next day in Underdog, and beautiful sunny weather covered the whole town. The door to the subconsul's office was unlocked. Mr. Chihuahua decided to knock on it. "Mr. Subconsul, the sun is already up. Good morning," Chihuahua said as he entered the chief's office. "Time to go to work, huh?" Chihuahua lost his speech at what he saw. Vikir's entire room was covered in blood, with the corpses of some people lying on the floor, while Vikir was sleeping peacefully in the bed. "Good morning, Secretary," said Vikir, rubbing one eye after a nap. There was blood all over his pajamas. "What's with all these dead bodies?" the aide asked in shock. "Say, remember, must have killed them in my sleep," replied Vikir. "Really?" questioned the aide fearfully. "No, I'm just kidding," said Vikir. Vikir got up and he and Chihuahua went about their business together. "So, what kind of childhood did you spend in your parents' home?" the aide asked. "Very even fun," he replied. They went outside and the subconsul thought, "There have been too many flies lately. 2 poison arrows, 4 poison drinks, sulfuric acid, shooting, arson, running over by carriage, and so on." There were many things, he recalled, of his attempted murders. "Doesn't that mean I'm drawing attention to myself?" Vikir asked. "Oh, you're just crazy," replied Chihuahua. "In the last illegal auction, I got the Hell Buffalo Level A skill Indestructible Life, and it's pretty effective," said Subconsul. "His skin is now fortified by the waters of the river Styx and Indestructible Life. Yesterday, when attacking the Master, even a graduate-level assassin was unable to pierce it. And yet it's infuriating," said Vikir. "Reasonable words," the aide chimed in. "Someone arrived at their house in a carriage. I couldn't see who was in it, but the flags on it were familiar. It was the flag of the Baskervilles. It was flying on the carriage, but who had come to see them? Did they come from the main house?" Vikir asked, pondering the newly arrived guest. The carriage door opened and some man stepped out. The Chihuahua froze at what he saw. It was the same. They stood in front of the carriage and waited with held breath for this man. When the Chihuahua saw the carriage with the Baskerville family flags, he froze like a statue, because he knew the main family had arrived. I wonder if only Barrymore got out of the carriage. Could he have come here himself on Hugo's errand? Vikir and Barrymore were madly happy to see each other after such a long time apart. The Chihuahua still stood motionless as if paralyzed. thereby showing his respect for the members of the main family. Barrymore said he had been watching the Vikir's progress since he left Baskerville Mansion. For a Chihuahua, Barrymore was a true ideal. After all, he works for the most bloodthirsty family of Baskervilles, where for one mistake they take away the head. You can't imagine a better manager than Barrymore. The Chihuahua couldn't stop admiring Barrymore. After all, he had achieved the ideal in their work. And to see Liv the chief manager in the whole empire is a real miracle for him. But the Vikir asked his old friend with surprise why he had come here. The point is, Hugo appreciates Vikir's accomplishments as sub-consul, and he wants him to come back to his home. The Vikir was incredibly surprised that Hugo liked what he'd been doing all along. I mean, he was after a different outcome, and he was working hard for it. Naturally, Vikir arrived at Baskerville Manor. At the meeting, Hugo read out the Vikir's characterization of the sub-consul. In short, every man in the Androg was pleasantly surprised by Vikir's new policy, so that the Baskervilles could shed their image as swordsmen with swords but no brains. Hugo thanked Vikir for doing such an excellent job, for the good of the family. But the Vikir said it was only his duty as sub-consul. Hugo was glad to hear that. It's a sign of professionalism. And for his excellent work, the Vikir will receive an award that only a select few get. And as a reward, Hugo got the Vikir into the finest academy for swordsmen in the Empire. Going to the academy is the dream of all Baskervilles, for there they can gain invaluable knowledge and skills. The academy is where all the elite of the Empire gather, and the best of the academy is the Colosseum. Most of the entrants are children of nobles and members of royal families. For internal security, the place is used as a dormitory for students. And finally, the Vikir has time to develop away from Hugo's eyes. But along with him, Vikir asked to send the 3 Highborough brothers Milborough and Lowborough. He intends to use them as punching bags. Hugo found it surprisingly easy to agree to this. Suddenly he asked Vikir about the strategy she had developed 8 years ago. This strategy involved training with the Morg family, and leasing ruby mines to them, and then destroying the entire Morg family. Hugo said with an incredibly satisfied face that his plan had worked 100%, and now the Morg was no longer a threat to the family. The Vikir asked with surprise what was all this about. Surprisingly, the Morg were the first to offer joint submission, which was quite malleable and unexpected on their part. Hugo suggested that the Vikir walk the grounds before he left, to make sure the laws he had set up were clearly enforced. Hugo felt it would be more than useful to him. The Vikir had no choice but to agree to it. His only friend and associate, a Chihuahua, came to see the Vikir off. He also promised to keep an eye on things until the vice-consul was there. During their time together, Vikir and Chihuahua became true friends. Vikir looked at him sadly and told himself that soon he would have to say goodbye to the Chihuahua for good. No sooner had the convoy moved away from the Androg than they were joined by a squad of Pitbulls. This time their task was to escort the Vikir to the Morg family's estate unharmed. In charge of this operation will be Seafordshire Baskerville, Earl Bostoner's right-hand man, and the strongest commander of the Pitbulls. Vikir politely asked how things were going with his uncle. After taking over the military auction, the Count is obsessed with getting Vikir to join his squad of ruthless Pitbulls. To be honest, the Vikir didn't like him very much, but quarreling with a man who has an entire squad of first-class assassins at his command. Not a good idea. Here begins the area that the Baskervilles have leased to the Morgs. At first glance, you wouldn't think anything illegal was going on here. At first glance, everything looks normal. But that impression is deceptive. This delegation is technically a territorial inspectorate, but it's actually a search party to subdue the barbarians, led by Vicar. Baskerville Intelligence has learned that there are 2 MPs from the Morg family, 30 members of the House of Presidents, and about 100 wizards. In contrast, the Baskervilles have brought only a Vikir, a member of the House of Presidents, and a dozen knights. The rest of the Baskervilles ambushed them on the other side of the mountain range. Well, as Hugo said, it's not a bad thing for a Vikir to explore the barbarians' lives from the inside, to better fight them. In front of the fortress of the Morg family, there was a huge field of dry trees with barbarian skeletons strung on their branches. And it was all the work of magicians. So the Morgs left a message for the barbarians, rough enough, but very clear. Even a man as brutal as Vikir was alarmed. At the gate to the fortress, the Baskervilles meet, the 3 sisters, who in the future become the chief antagonists of the Baskervilles triplets. The Vikir said he had come here on behalf of Hugo de Baskerville, to monitor and resolve the situation. But he couldn't get the thought out of his head that he had seen the sisters before. when suddenly he remembered that they were the three flowers of the Morg family. The three sisters are Hysis, Middlesis, and Lewis. Individually, they are already crazy, but when they get together, the madness pierces the sky. They are so crazy that even the members of the Morg family are afraid of them. Vikir ordered the sisters to open the gates immediately, but Hysis had already reported that the Baskerville delegation had arrived, and without permission from the head of the fortress, she has no right to open the gates. As the Vikir suddenly shouted out, "The owner has come to see his property. What right do you have to stop me?" But the sisters refused to open the gate on the grounds that the Baskerville family had written the Tenants' Protection Act. Except they didn't realize the Vikir had already changed that law. The young Baskerville was very angry at the sisters' brash behavior. He held himself back from tearing them to shreds with all his might. Vikir makes a final warning to those to open the gate. Even though he tried to restrain himself, his aura was still bursting out. When the girls felt his aura, they were terrified. They didn't expect him to be so strong. They realized that even their trio couldn't defeat him. Despite this, Hysius, determined to stop him, no matter what it cost her. Though insane and bordering on idiotic, you can't call her stupid. She aimed her attack under the horse's legs, so as not to hurt the Baskerville's representative in any way. When all of a sudden Hysis started screaming at the top of her lungs, "If you say wait, wait, rude swordsman, you don't enter a family's morgue grounds without asking." Apparently, these sisters don't understand words. But that's okay, the Pitbulls will teach them politeness. Despite the incredibly calm nature of Pitbulls, even they couldn't take that kind of insolence. Among the many voices of the warriors, the Vikir heard painfully familiar voices. Things are heating up. The sisters thought they were as good as the henchmen of the Baskervilles. It's all clear now. The famous Baskerville triplets. This is the first meeting of the famous triplets of both families. It is from this moment that the story of their confrontation begins. The Vikir was not very happy to see them. Their fiery temper and rash actions could change his plans. And if anything went wrong, the Vikir would be responsible. So the brothers wanted to thank Vikir for recommending them for admission to the academies. Except the Vikir didn't ask for their gratitude. Vikir is already regretting choosing them, but at the academy, he'll need someone to practice his skills on. So he'll have to be patient for a while. They will be the strongest weapon in the hands of the Vikir in the future. They are not good with their heads, so they are not able to make their own decisions, but they follow orders perfectly. If you tame them, they can be quite useful. So this time, the Vikir allowed them to do whatever they wanted. The sisters thought they were three idiots who couldn't do anything without each other, even though they were the same. No matter how stupid the brothers are, you can't take away their confidence, and you have to admit, the three of them are a pretty serious force. Their battle will be interesting to watch. In a past life, the Morg triplets were known as three sorceresses wielding the elements: water, earth, and nature. The combination of the three works perfectly together. Increase the magic of each of them tenfold. Underestimating their combined attacks is tantamount to suicide, for which they were nicknamed the Three Flowers of the Morg. They had an incredible array of spells in their arsenal, both offensive and defensive. But despite all that, the Baskerville brothers have a valid point, and those are their swords. Well, let's get started. Highborough had no trouble breaking through the sisters' first line of defense with his sword. However, he did not take into account the fact that this plant was alive and could counterattack. Luckily, his skills are high enough, and he was able to deflect the blow. The brothers didn't expect this to be possible. They still haven't realized that their greatest strength is teamwork. Both Morg and Baskerville think of each other as total losers and idiots, and the first to take the enemy seriously will have the advantage. The Pitbull commander thought this battle was pretty fun. After all, it's not every day you see swordsmen fighting mages, and every battle like this is awesome. The question of whether magic or sword is stronger has been on everyone's mind since ancient times. With the help of mana, magic can reproduce poetry more powerfully. The swordsman can use mana and life force as fuel to create explosive power. Young trees of hope that will lead the sword and sorcerer families in the future. But isn't it fun to watch the talent and potential of the... If that's the case, isn't the Vikir the tree of hope? But the Pitbull commander hurriedly calmed him down and said that Vikir was already on a completely different level, and he didn't care about these childish games. But Vikir finds it all boring and a waste of time. He still had much to discuss with the manager, when suddenly the gates of the fortress opened, and out came a mage with incredible fire powers. There is only one sorceress in the Morg family who possesses such abilities at a high level. On the battlefield, there was an explosion of incredible force. The explosion was so powerful that it nearly destroyed the walls of the fortress. The Vikir was delighted, because he knew exactly who was behind this attack. He couldn't wait to finally see her again. When the flames flared, the Vikir saw no one in front of her. She was standing at the gate a second ago, but she could see no one in front of her. Whoa, how did she get up there so fast? She's changed a lot since the last time they met. The sisters immediately started making excuses that they were only defending the fortress. And it was the stupid dogs of Baskerville who started it all. In their carelessness, they named her Kamu. I could tell by the look in her eyes that she wouldn't tolerate being treated like that. After all, she is now a subordinate, and warned them that if it happened again, they'd be in the shoes of those poor souls. Finally, they were meeting again. Kamu was obviously happy to see him, even though the last time they saw each other was 7 years ago. She still blushes in front of him like she did then. The act of a little boy left an unforgettable imprint on the young lady's heart. But to be honest, the Vikir was glad to see her too. Her beauty just laughing. Even Pitbulls couldn't contain themselves. After all, this is the Morg that stole the hearts of all men. She kept all her lovers under her thumb and got into numerous scandals. But somehow, in this life, she doesn't seem to have any of those rumors. But there's no need for sentimentality now. Vikir came here on a mission. He asked her to open the gate. Upon hearing this, Kamu became incredibly angry. She told him, "I haven't seen you in years, is that all you're gonna say to me?" The Vikir was genuinely perplexed as to what else he was supposed to ask her, which made Kamu even angrier. Her whole body went up in flames. The Pitbull commander even thought that after the triplets' bout, there would be a bout of family geniuses. After calming down a bit, the commissioner screamed again. 0 points to you, Vikir van Baskerville, for treating your future wife like that. Oh shit. Vikir forgot he was engaged to a Kamu. He seems to be the only one who forgot about it. Even the triplets caught the facepalm. Kamu was clearly resentful of him. Had she been waiting for him all those long 7 years? That would explain why there are no rumors about her in this life. Despite this, Vikir still came here on an inspection, and Kamu decided to personally accompany him on it. She asked the vicar how much the Baskervilles knew about barbarians. His family knew almost everything about them, since Baskerville fights barbarians all the time. But Kamu didn't understand why Hugo had sent the young dogs here if he knew all the danger. Vikir said that it had already been agreed with the Morgs that the main force would be located in the mountains opposite. He asked her why she was asking all this if she knew about it. Smile. She said she was checking to see if he knew. But he was the head of the delegation. How could he not know that? But Kamu couldn't stop asking one question after another. And the next question was, which wild tribes are the most problematic? The Vikir knew from his past life that they were the Balak warrior tribe and the Roko shaman tribe. The Balak tribe's archery is especially high, which is many times better than the imperial archery. And their principle is still unknown. After Vikir answered all of Kamu's questions, she awarded him 8 points out of 100. Vikir was surprised that he got so few points because he answered all the questions correctly. Kamu asked with surprise, for a good answer. "I don't want a smart man. I don't like smart men. A man should be a little stupid." She gave another 6 points for riding. She gave him only 4 points for his dressing style. She thought he was dressed too boring. Vikir didn't answer her, but like a good man he just listened. And for his handsome face, she gave him 99 points. Every time she looked at him, she melted like ice cream on a hot day. But it is still a mystery to Vikir why he should become her husband. Kamu told him, since he passed her uncle's test, he should be her husband now. Kamu, this question made her incredibly angry. Her body was covered in fire again. Vikir was once again convinced that she was indeed a great firebender, when suddenly he suggested that she forget everything that had happened, and pretend it never happened. Kamu couldn't contain her emotions and threw some kind of rag right in Vikir's face, screaming, "How is it nothing happened when it did? You're such a fool." Wiping the rag off his face, he told her he was a genius, so he never forgot anything. But this piece of cloth she had thrown at him suddenly caused an incredible riot of emotion. It can't be, it's his jacket that he gave her 7 years ago, and she's kept it all this time. Such an act would melt the heart of anyone, even a man like Vikir. Does she really love him? Barbarians attack ruby mines, stealing local slaves and plundering crops. Morgs recruit slaves to sell them elsewhere. And this wall was built by earth and iron wizards over a month. There's no way the barbarians can get through it. The Vikir was amazed at the skill of the Morg family mages. It took them only a month to do what would have taken years for ordinary people. And these marks were left by Balak arrows. Even though this wall is reinforced with magic, Balak arrows have a powerful aura, and can easily penetrate walls 3 meters thick. Adolf was seriously wounded in the chest by an arrow that broke through the shield magic. Luckily his life was saved, but his pride was damaged. There must be a genius among barbarians. This just proves once again how dangerous the enemy is. Kamu told Vikir that she had seen a barbarian girl single-handedly take down an entire squad of first-class warriors, when a messenger interrupted their conversation. Apparently the barbarians are attacking again, but this time the Morg have reinforcements. But this time, the messenger came with good news. The search party has captured Varvar the scout. This is the perfect opportunity to interrogate him, judging by his clothing and the patterns on his body. He's a roko shaman. Unfortunately, the search party was unable to get any information out of him. No matter how hard they tried, he wouldn't talk. But since this barbarian is from a shamanic tribe, he was able to hide his thoughts from any magic. Kamu wanted to interrogate her personally. It was a personal matter for her. Because that month, the Rokoko tribe had raided the Morg family's estate. The barbarians took Kamu's third cousin, Little Rose. Naturally, she couldn't understand a single word, and all the interpreters had been killed or stolen. Hearing that they had no interpreters left, the Vikir offered to help. His knowledge of the Rokoko language is low, but it's better than nothing. When she found out, she just dropped her jaw. She couldn't believe he knew it either. It was hard for her to imagine what the Vikir didn't know. Vikir had to find out where Kamu's second cousin is now. His knowledge was enough to describe her appearance and ask where she was. Through the wild and crazy laughter, the Vikir could hear the familiar words. It was hard for him to say it, but her sister is dead, as the chairman of the estate is now in treatment. Oh, the chairman of the temple is inspecting the other side of the grounds. All decisions will be made by the Kamu Morg sub-captain and the House representative. For the crime he had committed against the Morg family, there was only one sentence awaiting this barbarian: immediate execution. As expected, Kamu just burned him. She made a promise that when the war was over, their language would only be spoken in hell. This is the true power of the Morg family. After the execution, Kamu ran outside. Vikir simply could not leave her alone at such a difficult moment. As he ran out after her, he saw her genuine crystalline tears. He was well aware that she was pretending to be strong, but she was still 15. Hoping to reassure her, he said, "I'm sorry for your loss. You must have been very close to your sister." That's what it really was. Rosa tried to imitate the Kamu in everything. She was an honest and kind child, not like the other members of the Morg family. Suddenly Kamu, he says, "Do you think I'm stupid? I'm a genius. I can't talk, but I can hear just fine." Vikir didn't know what she was talking about. Then he realized that she understood the language of the barbarians. And in fact, that barbarian said he ate her third cousin. Vikir wanted to make the best of it by hiding the truth. But unfortunately, it didn't work. That made Kamu cry even harder. Her heartache was so strong that your heart ached. She felt guilty for not being able to protect her sister. Even though the Vikir faces death every day, he felt something he had never felt before: regret. From now on, Kamu's main goal will be to destroy all barbarian tribes, whatever it takes. She quickly calmed down and decided that now was not the best time to cry. After all, she should be an example to the others. Even a Vikir was amazed at such fortitude and heroism. He made a promise that he would help her to finish off all the barbarians, when suddenly there was a loud clang, and that meant the barbarians had attacked again. But now Kamu was not alone. It's time for revenge. Barbarian, there is no way they will be able to approach the Morg fortress so easily. To do so, they will have to pass the dead field and a huge ravine. Could this be the barbarian that Vikir and Kamu were talking about? If she's really as strong as they think she is, she's not easy. Wow, that's some speed. No wonder their arrows could do so much damage to the wall. Apparently, it really is as strong as they think. It's amazing. She was able to destroy with a single arrow a huge wall built and defended by mages. After she made a huge hole in the wall, her warriors rushed forward. Their fighting spirit is amazing. No matter how strong warriors they are, barbarians are still barbarians. They would indiscriminately decapitate anyone who caught their eye. Vikir didn't expect them to get through the wall so quickly. Now they'll feel the full force of a Baskerville alumnus. Whoops, that's a twist. Even the Vikir's reaction wasn't enough to dodge that attack. That's what's weird. There's only girls in this unit. Why did they kill the others and let him live? Suddenly, one of them said, "Good husband hunting." At first, the Vikir couldn't believe his ears. Husband hunting? Do they hunt brides and grooms for good offspring? It was foolish to think they caught Vikir by accident. They only caught him because he wanted them to. He easily threw them off their riding wolves. What he had heard, however, did not give him peace. The barbarians were capturing humans for the sake of procreation. Even though Hugo has urged us not to engage until the main army joins, Vicky has no other choice. Unless he wants to be a target, the Vikir easily repelled all their attacks, even those the barbarians considered the strongest. His blade sliced through the flying arrows with incredible speed. The savages clearly did not expect this turn of events. They'd never met anyone like the Vikir before. A graduate of the Sword of the Baskervilles is no joke. Before Victor could do anything, the entire battlefield was engulfed in a terrible fire. Kamu in anger is something incredible. Now the Vikir recognizes the real Kamu from his past life. Cold and cruel. She's even scarier than the Vikir when she's angry. Kamu. I couldn't help but notice that Vikir has a liquid aura. He surprises her more and more every minute. Just the kind of man she needs. As suddenly, the Vikir said that the head had ordered not to engage until the main army joined. Kamu was well aware that Vikir could not disobey Hugo de Baskerville's orders. So Baskervilles is out. But it wasn't a problem for her. She can handle it all by herself. Her fire magic is enough to burn anything and everything in her path. The Vikir was once again amazed at how strong Kamu had become. Her power was even frightening. What's that? Out of nowhere, a dart flew straight into the carotid artery. Only a top-class marksman could do that. The poison spread with incredible speed throughout her body. Amazingly, Kamu survived, only paralyzed for a short time. One of the barbarians tried again to put a noose around the Vikir's neck. But he would not be able to do it a second time. The savage would pay for his insolence with his life. With just the two of them, they might be able to take on a whole barbarian force. But because Kamu is paralyzed, Vikir will have to guard her as well. And the Vikir decided they should retreat before the main Baskerville army arrived. But Kamu insisted that she must avenge her sister. A sense of anger has taken over her mind, and she can't make sense of the situation. If they don't retreat now, they'll both die. And there it is again. How does an arrow get that fast? Vikir's only had time to feel it, and it's already here. Oh shit, that was very close. A moment more and the Vikir would have been lying on the floor with an arrow in his neck. Who the hell is she? And where did she learn to be so skillful with a bow? From now on, she's the Vikir's priority target. So it was a distraction. It was all just to kidnap Kamu, Vikir. Even the fastest horse in the Empire can't keep up with a wild wolf. But everything happens as it should. In a past life, Kamu Morg was also captured by barbarians. Of course, soon she destroyed their entire tribe and returned, taking the name Black and Red Queen. And this nasty little bug is still at it. This time, it's decided to get into a melee. Luckily, it doesn't know that Vikir is no match for melee combat. What is it? She's beating the Vikir like a punching bag, and he can't do anything about it. Her combination looked more like lightning strikes than fists. So fast they were. Plus, she moves differently than the others. Her combat tactics are unlike anything the Vikir has seen before. Even during the Demon War, as a friend, she stopped fighting, and she says, "You and me. See you again." Is this girl that eyelids let out at the circus? That's right, it's her. What is she doing? This is her thanks for saving a life? I'm surprised Vikir didn't remember her right away, but it's 100% her. Those eyes he remembered from back then at the slave auction. Vikir asked her what she was doing all this for. After all, that wasn't why he saved her. And the reason was very simple. She wanted revenge for being captured. She said a member of the Morg family did it. The barbarians' policy was as primitive as possible. As far as damage was done, so much was paid. The target of their raid was the head of the Morg family. However, the barbarians said that if the Vikir wanted to find his girl, he should follow them. While the Vikir was considering whether he should fight at full strength, Adolphus and a band of magicians came to his aid, which scared the barbarians away. Adolphus Morg came running as soon as he heard the news of the attack. He's ready to rip the head off anyone who hurt his niece. But despite this, the barbarians still managed to escape. And now the only chance to save Kamu is to go to their camp alone. I gotta hand it to Balak. Their offense was over 3 minutes after the attack was signaled. Lightning-fast work. The situation was exacerbated by Kamu's lack of practice and attention. Apparently, the barbarians have fled to the uncharted region of the Red-Black Mountain, where the rumored main lair of the Balak is located. An uncharted area, a place where unbridled danger lurks. Entering them at night is too dangerous, even for a warrior as trained as Adolf or a Vikir. Adolf was tormented by a sense of helplessness. Suddenly, the Vikir says he has been to an uncharted area as a child. Thanks to his experience of searching and subjugation in his past life, Vikir knows most of this forest. Adolf's aides say going into the Red-Black Mountains at night, even with knowledge of the territory, is suicide. Adolf took it as a silly excuse. Adolphus immediately remembered the Vikir, though he didn't show it. He remembered how special he'd been as a child, and now he was his only hope. A dense forest of red-black mountains near Baskerville Manor. It was in this forest that the Vikir passed his first examination and obtained the head of the first Cerberus. This forest is home to poisonous thorny vines, bone-sucking mosquitoes, and silent spiders. The average person wouldn't last an hour here. There's a reason this place has been dubbed the forest that consumes life. But Vikir is not an easy man. He is faster and stronger than any warrior of any family, though he hides it well. It had been over 7 years since the last meeting between Adolf and the Vikir, and the mage of the Morg family was simply amazed at how strong he had become. Adolphus asked the Pitbull commander, with some care, if all the children in the Baskerville family were that good. To which the Pitbull replied that the young master was an exception. Even the Baskerville triplets accept the superiority of the Vikir over them. Though they may dislike it, it would be foolish to think otherwise. Minutes later, the Vikir seems to have found something. His experience and reflexes tell him that they are very close to the Balak camp. Anyway, they couldn't get far. Like a friend, a fire was lit nearby in the dense forest. Only barbarians could be this far into her known zone. However, there are rumors that in order to hear the pursuers, the hunters of the beams sprinkle the ground with dry leaves. Therefore, one must be extremely careful here. But the Vikir overlooked the fact that his team has an incredibly powerful wizard with 1,000 spells, who cast a spell of silence on his legs. Now that all preparations were over, Vikir decided to go on alone so that no one would see his true strength. Lastly, Adolf said he would never forget this act of his son-in-law. Just as the Vikir thought, it was the temporary halt of the barbarians. They tied Kamu to a tree so she wouldn't escape, but she promised to burn them as soon as she got out of captivity. Well, the barbarians didn't see her as a threat at all, so they just ignored her. They were more concerned that the hunt for the husbands had failed. Kamu couldn't believe her ears. It didn't fit in her head how one could hunt future husbands and wives while killing all of their family members. One of the barbarians took a great liking to Kamu. He wanted to share it with his brothers in the tribe. As the barbarian did not understand human language well, the words of Kamu were incomprehensible to him. But in her eyes, he saw the bright fire of rebellion. But he was stopped in time by that girl Vikir saved. Even though she had saved Kamu's life, she considered her a slave. But Varvara thought Kamu was his slave. He was the one who darted at her and put the noose around her neck. Well, to be honest, he only did it because of this girl. After all, she's the one who stopped the Vikir. Kamu was very surprised that tribes have internal conflicts. She realized from their conversation that the girl was the chief, and her name was Ayen, and also that she has enough strength to resist Vikir, an entry-level graduate. The man's name is Ahun, but even though outwardly he looks much stronger than Ayen, he was insanely afraid of her. Ayen is amazing. Can such a fragile girl be such a strong warrior that even the strongest barbarians fear her? When suddenly Ayen spoke to Kamu with almost no accent. From a great look and build. Not a bad pedigree either. Future Morg leader. Ian hated the Morg family for one reason only. Once, the Morg had captured her and sold her into slavery, and she told her story. How she was freed from her terrible captivity by the great sword warrior. And after that incident, she vowed revenge on all the Morgs, when suddenly there was a massive explosion, which destroyed the entire barbarian camp. Ayen clearly didn't expect anyone to find them here.